Katherine Boyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. So you came on my radar, about a couple of weeks ago from a mutual friend, and so I looked into you, and you're invested in all of the companies that just fascinate me every day. Yeah. And I'm brand new to, kind of diving into the tech space. And man, this has been mind-blowing for me just to be able to talk to these people who are just on a whole nother operating field as everybody else, and learning about some of the innovations, and just talking to American innovators, which, to be honest, in the past couple years, I haven't had a lot of hope in our country.
Yeah.
But since diving into the tech space and seeing, we really do have the world's best innovators.
We do.
And we attract that. And these people come from all over the world to come here and live the American dream. And I personally needed that to restore some hope in this country.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, you're invested in a lot of those companies, and a lot more than I even know about. And so it's an honor to have you here today, and I've been looking forward to this.
It's an honor to be here. And I always say I come bearing good news. Usually after people talk to me, they are very optimistic. And I always have to warn people, I am in the business of optimism, right? Like, I'm an early stage investor. I'm always thinking that a company, I only invest if I think a company is going to become some extraordinary movement. But I agree with you. The last few years, what we have seen as investors in, the American Dynamism ecosystem, the companies that are building for defense tech, it did not exist 5 years ago. It just did not, there was not the enthusiasm or the excitement. DoD wasn't excited about buying from startups. It's a complete 180. And so I always like when people say they meet these founders and they have hope for America. It's like, yeah, every day I get to meet them. And I think that's why I'm such an optimist too, is because I get to see on the ground floor these young engineers who are just incredibly patriotic. Their patriotism, I always say, I was patriotic because, we're the generation that remembers 9/11. Like, we were coming of age in 9/11. It changed our lives. These kids weren't even born. They have no recollection of some of the things that we understand. And I think because of that, they have this youthful optimism of loving their country and wanting to build for the next generation of defense. So it kind of keeps me going too. I think I'm like you, where it's tempting to black pill.
It's good to see.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in Americans in a long time. I'm not just talking about the past 4 years. I'm talking a long time. Yes. I've just not seen that. And even, we were chatting at breakfast a little bit about, was it, I don't know how many years ago, it didn't seem long ago that Silicon Valley almost seemed, it seemed anti-American and zero patriotism. And in the past, I would say in the past, year and a half maybe. And that's just from, I haven't been looking into this very long, but maybe in the past year and a half, it seems like it's doing a 180.
It really is.
And very concentrated on defense tech and in a lot of areas where I think we're weak on,
Totally.
Compared to a lot of our adversaries.
Totally.
So that'll be I know you have a huge part in that, so I can't wait to get to that. But I'd like to do a life story on you, and that's kind of my specialty here. And so how you got into all this, which is also fascinating to me because you're not a tech person.
Not a tech person.
And I want involved, and I'm not a tech person, but I'm just infatuated with everything that's going on. So do a life story, and then get to, I'd like to talk about some mistakes you've made and some of the big wins and what it's like getting in on the ground level at some of these companies. So
Totally. Yeah.
Perfect.
A lot of mistakes we can talk about.
Perfect. But everybody starts out with an introduction, so here we go. Katherine Boyle, a venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz and co-founder of the firm's American Dynamism practice, coined the term American Dynamism in 2021 to refer to companies supporting the national interests across aerospace, defense, manufacturing, energy, logistics, and critical infrastructure. Wrote the original American Dynamism manifesto to encourage founders, veterans, and engineers to build companies for America. Since then, Andreessen Horowitz has invested billions of dollars in iconic defense tech companies, including SpaceX, Anduril Industries, Shield AI, Saronic Technologies, Castelion Corp, Apex Space, Cape, and many others. Prior to becoming a VC, you were a reporter at the Washington Post and are a rabid defender of free speech and free thought. BA in government from Georgetown University, an MBA from Stanford, and a Master's of Public Advocacy from the National University of Ireland, Galway. A mother and a practicing Catholic, you often write about the importance of building technology that strengthens the most important institution in America, the family. And probably a lot more, but I think that's most of the important stuff. So then before we get too in the weeds, I have a Patreon account, and that's our subscription account. They've been with us since the beginning here, and we've turned it into quite the community and very engaged. And so one of the things I do is I offer them the opportunity to ask each and every guest a question before we get rolling here. So this is from Ian Lane. Given your work with the American Dynamism Initiative, what role do you see startups playing in revitalizing U.S. military industrial capacity, especially as peer adversaries like China scale up defense innovation through state-backed efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it is the startup community has to fix this problem, because it's not going to come from the traditional primes. It's not going to come from, family-owned machine shops. The new technology needed, particularly on the industrial-based side, is so important. You need hardware, you need software, but most importantly, you need people who understand how to build for production. So I think that startups are going to be, they are integral. That's the whole thesis of American Dynamism, which we'll get into. But the real thing we need to be focusing on, and I think a lot of people don't recognize that, they know Anduril, they know SpaceX, those are companies that sell directly to the government. There's a whole other category of company that's building for the legacy primes. It's building satellite buses or building automated machine shops so that you can build more critical parts for aerospace and defense. So there's this whole category of tier one suppliers that are building up the defense industrial base, working with the primes and working with the new primes like SpaceX and Palantir and Anduril. So it is incumbent upon these young founders, these very technical founders, to be able to build as quickly as possible, but really to focus on production. My focus as an investor, there's a lot of companies that are focused on just building software. I'm really focused on the SpaceX-like companies that are building for mass production, that understand that, as Elon says, the best part is no part. Simple design for manufacturing so that we can go from 1 to 10 to 10,000 to 100,000 of something that's critical. And that is going to come from startups. It's a new methodology of how you build.
Why don't you think the primes are re-engineering how they do business?
Oh, for so many reasons. I mean, one is they are based on a set of requirements. They have been building for a set of requirements for many, many years. Oftentimes they're getting paid, per hour. They charge per hour, right? Like they're not on fixed price contracts. They're on, cost plus contracts where it's the amount of engineering hours that you do on a product, plus a fixed margin, which is a terrible incentive for any company. Like if I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna, paint your house or mow your lawn, and you're gonna pay me per hour, I'm gonna take all day. Mm-hmm. But if I actually judge the project and say it's gonna cost however many dollars it does to paint this room, like I'm gonna wanna make sure that I, budget it right, that I, get the cheapest paint, right? Like, so it's the way that capitalism works outside of every other system except the DoD is that you have fixed price contracts where you know what something's going to cost you. And if it goes over budget, the risk is on the company, not on the government. But the primes have been engineered so that they can always say, well, we went over budget, so you're going to have to give us more money. We're going to get our 7% margin no matter what. And if it takes 2, 3, 4 extra years because you have a different request or you say, actually, we want it built this way, we're happy to accommodate you. But that is going to mean that you're not getting the products in time. And Silicon Valley operates in the opposite way, and particularly venture capital. You give a company more capital in many cases than it even needs to speed up the process of production, to speed up the R&D, to speed up the number of products they can build at one time. And the company is always going to zero. What I always say about venture capital is it's so different than any other type of business where you take out a bank loan and you say, I'm going to build a business, and then you want to make more money than you spend. Silicon Valley is the opposite. You want to spend more money at knowing that you're going to go to zero in 18 months if you don't raise another round of capital. But what that allows you to do is to bring on the best engineers to produce the product as fast as possible. And when you compare that methodology of we're going to build hypersonic weapons, or we're going to build satellite buses, to the companies that have been around for 100 years. They don't know how to operate like that. It's not their incentives, but it's not the type of talent that they have on the team that wants to operate in that 20-hour-a-day environment of knowing they're going to go to zero. So it's a very different incentive structure. But the last 25 years in America, this is how companies have been built. Venture capital is the dynamism engine of all innovation in America. It's the envy of the world. And so we have to make sure that this system is not just operating for the Facebooks of the world and the TikToks of the world, the consumer technology that we use. We have to make sure that we bring this urgency and this capital and the speed to the things that matter most, which is, of course, building our defense industrial base.
What do you think is going to happen to the primes? Are they going to just get phased out?
So I don't think so. I think they're waking up. My view is probably the best thing that can happen for the DoD, and this is me speaking as someone who would like to see the DoD encourage competition, is to go back to that pre-Last Supper 1990s model where we had 50,000 companies working in defense, a lot more primes, right? Like, now I think something like 40% of the major programs go to 5 primes. It was not like that in the 90s. Post the Last Supper, when the DoD came to all these companies and said that there's going to be, massive budget cuts post-Soviet Union, you're going to have to merge. That led to a merging of these companies where there was just no competition. And I think the DoD thought by merging them that you'd save the companies, that they become more efficient. The opposite happened. It just meant that they didn't have to innovate and they didn't have to work hard because there was no competition. So I think the best thing that can happen is we'll probably see those primes lose a stranglehold on programs. They're good at building some things, right? Like they're good at building very exquisite systems, right? We were talking about like the B2 and how we only have 19. The companies like the startups that we are investing in now, they want to build thousands of something, and that's how they're building their product design is to build attritable systems versus these sort of legacy exquisite systems. So I think you'll see primes that are focused on the things that they know how to build, that take a little bit longer. I think they'll lose their stranglehold on sort of getting these new programs of records. I think that would be the best thing that could possibly happen. And then startups can focus on the things that have to be made fast, and particularly the software-defined, attritable systems that operate in the battlefield that have to be upgraded, that have to be changed based on the technology that's changing the battlefield. I don't think the primes are capable of doing that.
How are they? I mean, when you say they're waking up, what do you mean by that? They're waking up.
It used to be when I would go to, so I was a very early investor in Anduril, and in Silicon Valley, a $1 billion company is like a big deal. It's not a big deal. $1 billion in Washington is not a big deal, which tells you how screwed up our incentive systems are. But when I would go to talk to people inside the DoD or talk to, across administrations, from 2017, 2018, 2019, companies like Anduril, they'd be like, oh, that's cute. That's really cute what Palmer and those guys are doing over there, right? It was almost like laughing at them. And Elon had this same experience with ULA and Boeing. They used to make fun of the fact that their sort of place in Cape Canaveral, there was a tent, right? It wasn't like this fancy launch pad. Like it was kind of, I would say homegrown, kind of homespun. And they'd make fun of them like these guys that have everything under a tent are going to be able to launch a rocket. Yeah, right. And then look at where we are now, where SpaceX is, responsible for 85% of launch across the country or across the world, actually. So I mean, like they are a true, they are our path to space. And that only took, SpaceX was started in 2002. It's 2025. They really gained market share very quickly. And so you kind of see it happening with Anduril now, where people are picking their heads up. Anduril is an 8-year-old company, and they're kind of like, like they're down selected for some major programs now. Like they're not just building, in the beginning, I'm sure, you spent some time with Palmer. He talked about how they were building sentry towers and really focused on border control. They were selling to DHS. So DOD just thought they were, kind of a cute little company that was never going to get in the way of any of these primes. And now they're winning major contracts. And so I think it's irresponsible if the primes are saying, oh, well, those guys are never going to win, or we'll beat them at the lawfare, right? Like it's like, oh, well, we'll take them to court and make sure that they can't get the access to these big contracts because these are ours. I just think that the world has fundamentally shifted. There's too many people who recognize that you need the best and brightest engineers in America. And the people of Silicon Valley, you need the talent and the AI labs across the country. You need them working on defense. And those guys aren't at Lockheed Martin.
Yeah. It's it's really interesting. It's like a whole new wave, of innovations coming in. And I mean, like I said, I don't know much, but you don't hear a lot of innovation coming out of the big primes like Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing.
I think it's 2% of their budget is spent on R&D.
See a lot of Boeings falling out of the sky lately, but not much innovation.
Yeah.
A lot of witnesses are being killed mysteriously. But anyways, we'll get into a lot more of that. And one more thing before we get going, everybody gets a gift.
Oh, thank you so much. Terrific. Thank you.
Vigilance Elite gummy bears.
For wanting to try these, so thanks so much.
You're welcome. They're amazing. So let's get into your backstory a little bit here.
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in northern Florida in Gainesville, university town, football town. You had our guy Tebow on recently. He's sort
amazing human.
He's still the pride of the city, right? It's like those are the glory days. It's like he's still our guy. But I grew up. I always say I had like the most normal '90s Florida childhood. And in some ways, it's like that's what in some ways I feel like I want to give my children is that same sort of normal '90s childhood. But my story really starts with, I always say it starts with my dad. I came from a family of priests. My father was born during the Depression, 1931. And as happens in big Irish Catholic families at that time, poor Irish Catholic families, the smartest kid was always sent off to the priesthood. So at 17, he joined the Jesuits. And his dream was he wanted to be a missionary doctor. He wanted to go to the poorest parts of America across the world. But he also wanted to be a physician. So he wanted to practice medicine, heal the body, heal the soul. I sometimes think he would have been very aligned with some of the Maha stuff that's happening today. But 10 years into the seminary, and this is why it's so important for my life, the seminary in Chicago told him, like, sorry, we don't have the money to send you to medical school. Sorry, you're just going to have to be a normal priest. And he had sort of this life crisis. What am I going to do? And he decided to leave. And I always say, like, that's why I'm sitting here. Like, if he had stayed, he would have been a very good priest, but I wouldn't be here. So I'm very grateful he had that crisis of self and decided that his calling for medicine was more important than his calling for God. But the reason that happened, and the other person I'm really grateful to who just passed away is my Uncle Pat. My Uncle Pat is like a hero to me. He's a hero to a lot of people, but he was my father's Irish twin, so he was 9 months younger, and he was in the Jesuits with him, following him. And the reason my family was okay with my dad leaving was because my Uncle Pat's like, well, I'm going to stay. And of course, my Uncle Pat was sort of a rebel. He got kicked out of the Jesuits 3 times for language, beating people up, not respecting authority. He was not a good priest. Probably like some of the priests you've had on your show. He's more like that. He's a tough guy.
I love those kind of priests.
Yeah, no, there were more of them back in the day. There's not enough of them anymore. But he stayed in the priesthood, became a Jesuit. And then Vietnam happened, and he joined the Army. So he joined 82nd Airborne Division. And the reason he joined is he's like, I'm a tough guy. Like, I'm physically fit. I look around at all these other priests. Like, who else is going to go to Vietnam? So he was an Army chaplain. He was one of the first Catholic chaplains in Vietnam, did 4 tours.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, the stuff he saw. He never talked about it, of course. Like, I only really started learning a lot about it at the very end of his life. But he came back, 4 tours, came back radically anti-war, but also radically pro-life. Like, we have to protect life at all costs. And I grew up in this family where, like, he was the hero of the family. It's like he was what we aspire to be, God and country. So I grew up in this very Irish Catholic family. My dad started medical practice in the 60s in northern Florida. Integrated practice, was sort of radical at the time. Very poor practice. His view was, you take care of the working people. So all the images of me, growing up, I just have all these memories of my dad having all the cops come into our house at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night and giving him a shot, like the old, what is it, the image of the old-timey doctors. You pull your pants down, give you a shot, and blanket on the name of the Norman Rockwell, in the white coat with the stethoscope. But that was my dad. He was just like wanted to be a priest, ended up a doctor, and took care of the people in our community. And I always say, like, pillars of the community used to be a thing. Mm-hmm. We don't have, like, our generation doesn't have as many of those people that stay in their community, that say, I want to take care of everyone, where you're just known as the person that the first responders could go to, or that the cops can go to, or the people, like, that you're going to help out the people who are really supporting your community.
Why do you think that's changed?
I think it's changed for a lot of reasons. I think people didn't used to move around in the same way, right? Like it's like, it's the kind of push for college, I think, has destroyed so much of the social fabric of the country. But it's like now if you're, it's like he was the smartest in his family, he got sent to the priesthood. Now if you're the smartest in your family, you get sent to Harvard, right? Like you get sent to a school, you get pulled out of your family, you get pulled out of your church, you get pulled out of your community. And then you're told, you have to chase the job. You have to chase the dream. You have to keep making more money. You have to keep doing more things. And it's like, it's rare for people who are sort of treated as the success stories to stay in their community. And I think that's a huge problem. It's like a huge problem that people, don't put down roots and live somewhere for 50 years in a town that, where they can truly be sort of that pillar and that beacon.
Interesting. Do you think it has anything to do with the political climate, the polarization of America?
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking about this. I actually think the politicization of America might actually be a good thing after COVID, right? It's like a lot of people, like I'm in Florida now. I used to be in San Francisco. A lot of people are waking up that where you live, the city you live in, it actually matters.
Yeah.
It matters for how your kids are educated. It matters for a lot of the things you don't think about until it's too late. Matters for crime. It matters for the sort of ideologies you want your family exposed to. And so I think there's something there is a bit of a return, talking about optimistic things. I think there's a bit of a return to people recognizing, I don't need to live in New York City or San Francisco. Like where I really want to be is in a place where I know I'm raising my family and raising my kids with the values that I had. I mean, I always say I moved back to Florida because I wanted my kids to have the 90s childhood that I did. And I think they can get it there in a way that they're certainly not going to get it in San Francisco.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. It's like we just seem to be moving farther and farther and farther apart with every 4 years for the past, 12 years?
Yeah.
Seems like at least 12 years. And it's like, man, like it's just, I catch myself doing it. It's like, not much, but a lot of people are just scared to share just a simple opinion because they don't want to be, blasted or judged, even in like a small town environment like this.
Totally.
It seems like.
I think a huge part of the problem is we've replaced, America has always been a religious country. And then you saw this decline starting around, 1970s, this real decline in religion. It's coming back up again we'll talk about a lot of optimistic things, but that's one thing I'm optimistic about is the religious revival. But, 5-10 years ago, it was really bad, right? Where the continued decline of people not believing in God, not going to church, but it leaves this hole for some other sort of ideology. Mm-hmm. And I think Americans have replaced their love of God, their love of country with their love of politics. And so now we sort by ideological preference, politics. It's like, well, you're, the way that people in previous civilizations used to feel about religious outsiders is how we feel about political outsiders. And so I do think we're more polarized, but I think the root of that is that we don't have anything in common anymore. And we used to have sort of this, Christian ideology or sort of even just understanding that America has certain values. And we don't, for a very long time, that was under attack. Mm-hmm. Decades that was under attack. And it's only now that we're sort of moving back to people saying, okay, maybe I should go to church. Maybe going to church is a good thing. I mean, you even have the New York Times. People, on the op-ed pages, I always think like they're a good beacon of sort of liberal thought. The op-ed page is saying, well, maybe we should return to religion.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
The New York Times is putting this out?
Yeah. I mean, they've been putting out some stuff recently where it's like, they funniest one, the op-ed page from last week had 3 different stories about the declining birth rate. 3 different stories about what is wrong that we are not having enough children. And that used to be a conservative, social conservative, religious person talking point about having more babies. And now the New York Times is worried, and they're saying, there was another article that was so funny. I wish I had the actual headline. It was like, we don't see men anymore. Like, where did the men go? The men need to come back to us. Like it's a woman talking about how there's a gulf between men and women. And I'm just thinking, at least they see there's a problem. They don't know the reason for the problem. Like, that's a whole backstory. Well, hopefully they'll learn at some point, but they see there's a problem. And so I think I'm at least optimistic that we seem to be kind of turning the corner on, okay, like it's good to have families. It's good to think about where you want to live, how you want to raise your children. And hopefully that will lead to asking bigger questions about what does it mean to have a good family and what does it mean to be a good person.
Wow. I had no idea the New York Times was putting pieces out like that.
It's fun to read just for opposition research. It's a fun thing to read just to see, okay, like you might not agree with what they're saying, but it's like, wow, like they wouldn't have published that 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you notice, by the way? Like, when did you notice that men have
disappeared
from the society?
Yeah.
But,
or that they have no interest in relationships with women, or that they have no interest in marriage. And it's but it was interesting because the article sort of blamed men for everything, and it's like, well, yeah, like next week they need to have the men saying why did the women disappear, or why did the women change, right? And I think that is a huge problem of the why we have this birth collapse, is that really like there's just been a full-on assault attack on the family for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense why you see fewer and fewer people having children.
How bad is our birth decline?
Oh, it is shockingly bad. So we are now at 1.6 per woman. Our replacement rate is 2.1.
I thought we were at 2.1.
It's been about I think 8 years that we passed the 2.1, and then there was a mild uptick in COVID. So people were hopeful. They were thinking, well, maybe it was just an anomaly those last few years. But then there was a steep decline since COVID as well. So yeah, we're at 1.6, and the millennials. I mean, the millennial generation, I think it's something like, we're older millennials. We're like, I think it's 1980 to 1986 is called the elder millennial generation. Something like 58% of us have children. That means, yeah, the lowest in history. So it is going to be a shock, a huge shock, when our generation ages and there's no one there to do important services. I mean, like there's a lot of not only economic reasons, but just like the social fabric of what's about to happen of not having children. I mean, this is how civilizations die.
Let's go into it. How is it going to affect us?
So
this isn't something I've talked about.
Yeah. So one, it's the economic situation is going to get very bad. When you think of, the boomers are the largest, I think, generational cohort. They're living longer than they ever have. They're healthier, but they're getting to ages, right? Like, who takes care of boomers when they're in their 80s and 90s? They're in nursing homes. You need service workers. You need people to be able to take care of these aging people, right? It used to be that you were taken care of in the family. We don't do that anymore. Now we have nursing homes, right? Like, it's very rare that someone moves in when they're at a certain age with their children and are taken care of. So those jobs, which used to be filled by service workers, there's no one who's going to be able to fill that. On every economic dimension, if you do not have a generation of workers, of people paying into the system, Social Security, I mean, Social Security is a huge issue, but if you don't have people paying into the system, doing the labor, being able to do the things for the elder generation, society starts crumbling. And then there's, of course, the social ramifications of not having families. I'm a firm believer that the most important institution in America is the family. The family used to exist to take care of the people who were weakest, right? Like, it's like, you used to have these big families, and, sometimes the weakest child would still be living with mom and dad at home, and that was okay. You sort of had empathy for them, but it was the family's responsibility to take care of these people. We quickly moved that to now it's the state's responsibility to take care of these people who may be sick in some way, may be unable to provide for themselves in some way, might have psychological issues. Now the state has to take care of them, which is why you see a lot of these people on the street now, because the state does a terrible job of taking care of these people. But as fewer and fewer children exist, it's like you're not going to have a society that can provide for itself, that can continue into perpetuity. And, the exponential decline of this too, where it's like, it sounds, oh, well, we went from 2.1 to 1.6. That can't be that bad. I mean, in a couple generations, that means that our population has shrunk by half.
In a couple of generations?
Yeah. And the best example of this, and I wish I had the numbers in front of me, is South Korea. So South Korea, I think their birth rate is the lowest of any country, any industrialized country. I think it's 0.9. And when you have fewer and fewer people, no one's doing the jobs. Japan is also heading this way. Their birth rate's quite low. The only sort of argument that people make as sort of the bright side of this that could potentially make up for both the labor loss and also just the civilizational collapse is robotics, right? Like, you could have robots do a lot of these jobs. But I think it is a very dangerous thing to say we're going to depend on automation and robotics to make up for the fact that humans are disappearing.
I mean, even China's dealing with this. They had the one-child birth policy, and then they boarded all of the girls.
Yep.
So now they just have
extremely short-sighted. And I think the bulk, we're always talking about how dangerous China is, how China is growing in power and importance. The most short-sighted thing they have ever done to their society that will eventually catch up with them is the demographic collapse that they are going to feel because of one child. Like they're trying everything now too. They're trying to end divorce, right? Like so there's now a policy, at least that I read about in China, where you have to have like a 90-day cool down period so that you don't divorce. They're trying to encourage young women to have children. Young women don't want to have children.
They're bringing in women from other countries, from what I understand.
Yeah.
They're sending them out to go find wives in the Philippines, Thailand, Japan, everywhere.
Yeah. But they recognize it's a massive problem, and probably recognized it before even we did. I think in some ways the conversation sort of hopped from the social conservative sort of church-going movement of gosh, like this is a huge problem, to sort of I would say the sort of techno-optimist Elon Musk talking about the birth rate as a big deal. It's now become sort of, I think, an issue that's okay for polite society and sort of liberal New York Times to be talking about. Like this is actually a real issue. So. First step is acknowledging it, but it is, 1.6 is a long way to come back from, especially with a millennial generation that, waited way too long to have children. I think the kind of there's a couple underlying factors that I don't think we talk enough about that have caused this. Is when you look at sort of our parents' generation, a lot of people didn't go to college. They started adulthood at 18. And sort of the sort of fertile window, you could say, for women was between 18 and 40, say. Like that was sort of the nominal window of when you could have children and it was socially acceptable. And then we had this incredible push against fertility and against having a family young that I think the millennials really caught wind of. It's like everyone needs to go to college, extended adolescence, like use your 20s to experiment and enjoy life. Like you don't really need to be focused on having a family. And what happened is the average age now of a first-time, I think, mother in America is 28. So 10 years after that, 18. So you've cut the window in half. The average age of a first-time father in America, I think, is 31. And that's for both college-educated and not college-educated. If you add on college on that, which I think is a real issue, it's even higher. It's like the average age of a first-time mother is 30. So you can understand how the birth rate's being cut in half if the entire window of when you can have children is cut in half. Because people are so focused on career and, finding themselves and sort of their extended adolescence rather than focusing on building a family earlier. You're just going to have fewer children. And then when you have fewer marriages, that also cuts it. So it's fewer people getting married, fewer people are going to decide to have children, which from a millennial perspective, to have 58% of people only having kids, I mean, that's compared to, what 89% of our parents' generation had children.
Wow. Do you know if the baby boomer generation are they still the biggest?
I believe they're still the biggest, yeah.
So this has always been a question about that I've had is just, what it's just real estate, but I mean, you see all these 55 plus communities being built. I mean, you live in Florida. I came from Florida.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, the Villages is like, about the Villages.
Yes.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
what is going to happen to all these 55 plus communities when that massive generation dies off?
Yeah.
I mean, are we just going to have? It's going to create a housing crisis.
Yeah, I think it'll be a housing crisis. Fewer people, and also like are millennials going to want to? The millennials in Gen X or in Gen X is actually a pretty small generation. Are they going to want to move into those places? Definitely not. In some ways. The bigger question, I think, is also, and I know you've had people on who've talked about longevity, people are living a lot longer too, which means they're going to have to work a lot longer, which means they have to be healthier for a lot longer. And so, if you have people living a lot longer and fewer people who are being born, it's just, it's society inverts on itself. You have a very top-heavy society of people who are older who can't do the work that needs to be done to actually protect a country.
Has any nation reversed this?
Not like I haven't seen anything recently successfully. There have been some attempts, like some people have pointed to countries like Hungary that are now paying. I think there's a policy in Hungary where if you have more than 4 children, you don't have to pay taxes. There's some extreme policies where you've seen that. The one anomaly in the Western world or in the industrialized world where they are well above birth rate replacement is Israel. And so there's questions about, is it because it's a religious society? They have a pretty large religious Orthodox community, right, that kind of makes up for the rest of the secular society that doesn't have children. If you have a family of 8 and 9 and 10, that's 10% of your population, then you can make up for some who are not having any. But we don't have that in America. We don't have as many, I would say we have more than Europe, which Europe is really the
They're
continent.
really on the decline, though.
Really on the decline.
I mean, the Islamic population is reproducing
Yes.
at a massive rate.
Yes, but even counting immigrant and Islamic population in Europe, they're still at countries. I think Italy's 1.2. I think France is 1.5. Everyone always looks at the Nordic nations as sort of the beacon of how we should be doing policy in the U.S. because they pay for free healthcare for mothers. They pay for free IVF, different things that people say we should experiment with. Their population decline is worse than ours. They're at 1.2, 1.3, 1.5. And so I think what's fascinating to me about this is that this isn't a country-specific problem or a cultural-specific problem. It's really all industrialized nations. And, there's probably healthcare reasons for it. There's a lot of research about...
I think men are 70% less, have a fertility rate of like 70% less than it was roughly about 100 years ago.
Yeah. Sperm counts are down. The sort of fertile window for women, again, cut in half. So there's something about the medical side of this and the health side of this that's also happening. But you can't ignore the memes and sort of the cultural destruction that happened since the 1970s, in my opinion, which is family bad, individual good, right? Like you shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself for the needs of your family. And the minute that people across the Western world started believing in sort of this like individualism, that's where you see just the family completely destroyed. And just fewer and fewer families means fewer and fewer children. And we're finally waking up to the consequences of that, which is a society that can't, grow its GDP. I mean, the economist version of this is it's a society that can't grow its GDP and that can't remain successful. But I think the human part of this is it's a dying society. It's a frail society.
I mean, how do we fix it?
I think you have to change the culture. I think you cannot change a spiritual and a cultural problem with economic policies. So the sort of easy answers that a lot of economists and sort of people who study this say is, okay, well, we need to make healthcare free, make birth free, make women feel more, feel that they have more benefits, maybe pay women to do work, right? Like pay them to stay at home. And, some of those ideas, like, I could say our healthcare system is expensive. It is expensive to have a baby in America. So making that cheaper on the margins, might affect a mother who says, okay, I have 2 children, maybe I want to have a third. But I actually think the bigger problem is cultural and spiritual.
I think it's the culture too. I mean, I think it stemmed from, the feminist movement.
Yeah.
Where it was get out, get a job, provide for yourself, you can do everything, which, yes, but it detoured women from having children.
Yeah.
And then women that do have children, I mean, it's almost like, me and my wife talk about this all the time. If you say you're a stay-at-home mom, it's like it's frowned upon in a lot of areas in the country. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking? Like frowning upon on a stay-at-home mom. I mean, what's more important than raising your kids?
Yeah.
And then I don't even know how single mothers do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the hardest job in the world.
It's you have to make it okay, and you have to take care of the single moms out there.
Totally.
It's scary.
Totally.
And I think about it. It's terrifying. I don't know how they make ends meet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the culture change is paramount for that. But
a lot of the research, it's always fascinating to me, the things you can't talk about. We can talk about the problem, but there's certain things we can't talk about that add to it. And you'll see, economics is always a thing people want to talk about because it's like, oh, well, if we could just fix it with an economic policy. But no one ever talks about what you said, which is that feminism did change the memes and the culture. But at the same time, no one talks about when you introduce birth control into a society and tell women, you can control your own destiny. That is a huge part of it. Like all of these declines in the industrial world started at the exact same time that the pill was introduced. So, we're not going to go back to a world that is pre-pill. Like that's just never going to happen across, both Western society and the industrial world. But I think you actually have to acknowledge all of the factors. And the fact that a lot of the people doing this research won't even acknowledge, something magical changed in the 60s and the 70s related to healthcare, related to how abortion was made legal in 1973, other nations followed. When you look at those as inputs into the story as well, it's like there's a reason why the birth rate is so low in these countries, and it's not just an American phenomena; it's a global phenomena, and you have to take into account all of those things. And I just keep coming back to the culture changed. Like there was something about what we prized and what we made high status in America, where most people, or I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people chose to have only 1 to 2 children, whereas their grandparents' generation and their parents' generation had 3 and 4. And a society that changes that dramatically in 1 generation or 2 generations is unstable. It's completely unstable.
Yeah. Well, Katherine, let's take a quick break. Want more from The Shawn Ryan Show? Join our Patreon today for more clips and exclusive content. You'll get an exclusive look behind the scenes where you can watch the guests interact with the team and explore the studio before every episode. Plus, unlock bonus content like our extra intel segments where we ask our guests additional questions, our new SRS on-site specials, and access to an entire tactical training library you will not find anywhere else. And the best part? Patreon members can ask our guests questions directly. Your insights can help shape the show. Join us on Patreon now, support the mission, and become part of the Shawn Ryan Show's story. Did you know chips and fries used to be cooked in tallow up until the 1990s when big corporations switched to cheap processed seed oils? Today, seed oils make up about 20% of the average American's daily calories. And recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues and inflammation in the body. Well, Masa decided to do something about it. They created a tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils. Not only do they eliminate bad stuff, they taste great, they're filling, and the best part is I don't get that heavy, sluggish feeling after I eat them. It's hard to find snacks to keep around the office that aren't ultra-processed or unhealthy. Masa takes care of that. Masa Chips is beloved by tens of thousands of customers and has been endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts. Ready to give Masa a try? Go to masachips.com/SRS and use code SRS for 25% off your first order. masachips.com/SRS and use code SRS for 25% off your first order. Summer's here, and if you're anything like me, you didn't spend the winter just sitting around. You stayed sharp and kept moving. And now it's time your gear caught up. And that's why I want to introduce you to Roka. I've been looking for eyewear that can handle any situation with performance and style. And let me tell you, these aren't your average shades. I've tested them in the real world from shooting to fishing to off-roading, and they hold up. They're lightweight, don't slide around on my face, and can take a hit without falling apart. And the best part, they look good. They're clean and modern, no frills here, just premium eyewear that performs without compromise. That's something that I respect, and that's also why every time I head out the door, I reach for my Roka shades. Roka's based in Austin, Texas, American designed, no cut corners. The optics are crystal clear, cut through glare, and the fit stays comfortable all day long. Need a prescription? They've got you covered with both sunglasses and eyeglasses. Not only does Roka have awesome shades, they also have these that protect you against blue light. I wear these every night when I'm winding down for the day, and I still got to look at my phone or my laptop or my iPad. It just helps you wind down and get ready for bed. They are a one-stop shop for eyewear that's built to handle whatever life throws at you. Roka is the real deal. Ready to upgrade your eyewear? Check them out for yourself at roka.com and use code SRS for 20% off site-wide at checkout. That's ROKA.com. All right, Catherine, we're back from the break. Get a little sidetracked there, but
Yes.
let's get back to
It's always good to go down a rabbit hole.
yeah. We'll probably go down a lot more, but yeah, let's get back to your story. So, son of a priest who left.
Yeah.
Talked about your uncle.
Yeah.
What were you into as a kid?
Gosh, I was a very precocious kid. Again, my dad was much older. I was the youngest, and so I was really into the news. I read a lot of books, but extremely precocious. I loved, like watching things with my parents. I got really into movies growing up. But I was always sort of this like very inquisitive kid. My dad, coming from the Jesuits, kind of like taught our family around the kitchen table the Socratic method, right? Like that you need to ask questions, that you can't be afraid of the truth. He was sort of this philosopher king.
I love that. I think that's a huge problem nowadays.
Yeah. Not sitting down
Nobody
at the table.
will ask questions.
No, yes, no, and not being afraid to be disagreeable. And I think, we were a family of disagreeable people, but it was really inculcated in me from an early age. So, I was always just interested in whatever was happening on the news, whatever was happening in the world. I was a very good student. My parents were not, they didn't like really push me. It was sort of a self-driven thing. I always tell the story of when I was in third grade. I got one B in my entire life, and it was in penmanship. And this is my very hard-ass, amazing saint of a mother sat me down, and she was like, "It's okay if you get a B in math. It's okay if you get a B in reading or whatever, but penmanship means you're lazy. You were lazy." And she's like, and it's funny, I have the worst handwriting today. My dad had terrible handwriting. Like, some doctor would probably say I have a genetic thing, but she's like, anyone can write. And you're going to sit down and you're going to practice writing penmanship an hour a day. And within like 3 months, I had the best penmanship of anyone in the class. I was celebrated for it. But it was moments like that where my parents were just so involved and so good, where like they never need to tell me again not to not work hard or that I wasn't working hard enough or that I was, lazy in some way. Like I just kind of, it was, you learn the lesson very quick. And my mom actually ran my dad's medical practice. And so the sort of our kind of typical life was, they would take us to the office. We saw the patients with my dad. We worked in the office, like from a very young age. They opened the office on Saturdays because people have to work and they wanted to be there for the patients. And so we had this really, really tight-knit family of work matters, work is a virtue. Everyone works hard. And the kids work hard too. It's not just mom and dad work hard and the kids get to play. It's like we're going to work as a family. And then on Saturday nights, we're going to go to church, go out to dinner after, the whole family with my grandparents who lived down the street. But it was like a very simple life, but it was very focused on working hard. And there was always these sort of stories in my family where, my dad would always say, like, you're not going to be the smartest in the room. You're not going to be the best at everything, but like no one is going to outwork a Boyle. Like no one is going to outwork you. And I think that was just sort of inculcated in me from early age. So I did a lot of things. I did piano. I was really into piano as a kid. I played sports. I wasn't naturally gifted, but worked hard at it. But I just had this sort of kind of seriousness of, okay, like we're Boyles and we work hard.
How many siblings?
So my dad had 6 kids, and it was sort of a Brady Bunch family. So I was the youngest of his 6, and they were much older. Because he was, as I said, he was 55 when I was born. And then my mother, we had 2. So they were older and out of the house, but very much like part of the family, half brothers and half sisters. And I always think part of the reason why I was so precocious is because I was around, I was millennial, but I was around all these Gen Xers, right? I was around all these older, babysitters and kids who would come through the house who were, in their 20s. And now they're in their 60s. But it was definitely this, this sort of, I was the baby sort of absorbing all of this stuff. And so I grew up really fast. It's like I was joking about movies I watched when I was a kid. My parents took me to see True Lies in 1994. I was 8 years old in the theater. It's like seeing these Arnold Schwarzenegger action movies, with a 7 or 8 year old kid. It was like, oh, she's the baby, whatever, she'll be fine. So I was an adult by the time I was, a teenager.
Nice. So you go to college. I know you had interest in joining the CIA.
Yeah. I mean, I was very interested in politics, foreign affairs. That was like my my love growing up. I'd say the big thing that happened and before I went to college was my father got very sick. He was chronically ill. So around when I was 12 years old, he had to retire. And I think that's something where if you're a kid that grows up with a chronically ill parent, like you grow up really fast. Like you start. I'm seeing it happen with my friends now, who their parents are getting older in their 60s and their 70s, and it's sort of like the caregiver caretaker relationship, and then the provider relationship sort of flips, where like when you're in your mid 40s, you start taking care of elderly parents. But I had that when I was 12, right? He had a severe heart attack and then had a chronic condition that made it hard for him to get out of bed. So my mother was an absolute saint.
Man, at 12?
Yeah, which is why I also think kids are resilient. And like my mother, again, an absolute saint, she didn't try to keep it from me. She was like, your father's sick. Doctor thinks he's probably going to die. But this is suffering. And he's going to suffer through it, right? Like he's going to, again, he was such a saint of a man too, where like he refused to take pain pills. He refused to sort of succumb to what was happening. And he actually lived for a while. He lived until I was in college, but he died when I was in college. And I always think the thing that like kind of, if you've had to take care of a parent for a while, you're of course sad when they're gone. But like the other thing that happens is you have this moment of just relief. Like that was like the real emotion that I felt was like, wow, like, my mother had been taking care of him for 8 years. And like when it happened, I was like, okay, like this is the beginning of my life. Right? Like it's because when that's all you've known is, okay, like I have to take care of my family. That's when I really just had this moment of, okay, like maybe I can go do something big now. Like maybe I can go do the thing and not have to worry about family or have to think about anyone but myself. I can be super selfish about what I want. And a lot of my friends were thinking about, joining the agency. I actually had a really interesting thing happen where I worked all through college, and I started walking a lady's dog, like this older lady who lived in Georgetown. She was afraid to walk around the neighborhood at 10:30 at night. So every night at 10:30 at night, I would leave the library, go to her house, and walk her dog. And over time, I learned that she was the first female station chief at the CIA.
No kidding.
Yeah. And like, I'd go into her house and she had like, in some ways it looks like a room like yours, just like just mementos of a life well lived. Like she'd been everywhere. She'd been all over Asia, just had the most incredible stories. But she was like this very demure, quiet lady. You would never know. She's beautiful, just lovely, very well mannered, but a polyglot. Like she could speak many languages. But you would never suspect her. And I just like I think it was partially spending so much time with her and like looking at her life and just thinking like, wow, like this is really cool. But then also, like just I grew up during September 11th too, right? It changed everyone's mind about, okay, what are you going to do? And that's why I wanted to go to Washington and kind of work in foreign affairs in some capacity. And I just said, after my dad died, I'm like, I want to do that. Like, I can finally do that. And going back to sort of like, I hadn't ever failed at anything. I was one of these kids. I was sort of I don't want to say I was a trophy kid, but it's like, again, I just worked hard at everything I did. And it was always a view that like, if you work hard enough in life, you can get what you want, right? So I just assumed going into that recruitment, like, oh, I'm a shoo-in, right? Like I'm top grad out of Georgetown, I have all these great references. I have these mentors who've done it, right? Like I'll be fine. It's not to say I didn't take it seriously, I did, but I was not prepared for the response I got in 2009, which was, after a year and a half in, like, sorry. You just get a letter back from the Recruitment and Retention Center that says, we do not need your services. You can, apply 3 years from now. And I think that was like the first time in my life where I was like, oh my, I don't have a plan B. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do.
I can't believe they didn't pick you up. What did you want to do over there?
So, I wanted to do ops. Like I wanted to just, but the because I was so young. Yeah. But the young, like the, 22, 23-year-olds, like they didn't put, like they sort of had a training program, right? Like it was like you do 2 or 3 years. It wasn't an analyst program, but they kind of put you in this sort of path, right? It's the kids who know how to do nothing, right? Like you knew how to do things when you were contracting, but the kids who are just out of college, they have sort of a training path for them, and then they figure out where they want to go. And it's funny, like
So you were in the training path?
Yeah, so I had done like multiple interviews, yeah. So they did multiple rounds of interviews. And I look back on it, it's so funny. I'm like, I know exactly why they didn't pick me. I am not an easy person. I am a disagreeable person. It's like after 8-hour interviews where they're really trying to get to know you. there's times where I'm like, I know exactly what I said wrong. Like, you're supposed to answer the question of like, why are you wanting to do this, right? The right answer is you want to serve your country, which is the right answer, right? And I said it multiple times, but by like the fifth time they ask it in a different way, I said something that was probably the through line of my life, which is, I just can't stand not knowing. I just can't stand not knowing. And of course, that's like the wrong answer. And to the lady who was interviewing me's credit, she was like, honey, you think you're going to know in here? Like, you think you're going to come in here and you're going to know anything? Like, and again, it's like, okay, you 23-year-old, like little girl who's never been told, like, get out of here. What a joke.
Damn.
So it's on me. Like, and they're right? Like, I am not I even today, it's like my colleagues are like, it's amazing you can actually work at a company, right? You are such a disagreeable, and they mean that lovingly, but like, I am not someone who doesn't say what I think. I'm not someone who takes orders very well. So I think they probably looked at my character after, it's like spikes in certain areas, like probably very good at getting information and meeting people, talking to people, doing the things that you need to do, but also probably not going to be able to deal with the culture.
Yeah. Probably for the best.
Probably for the best. I mean, things always work out
in
the way
the short
they are.
amount of time I've known you. A lot of things over there would have driven you insane.
I would. I think she did me a favor, but it was definitely like coming out of college, 24, no idea what I was going to do with my life, and it was sort of serendipitous how I ended up at the Washington Post, because I had taken a job and I had friends, who were already sort of in, and they're like, you got to be in DC, just take a job, but like take any job you can get. And so I got this kind of ridiculous, like the copy editor job, but it was at a newspaper called The Express. So if you've ever been in DC and you've gone on the Metro, it's the free Metro paper that the Washington Post hands out. And everyone, who's ever been on the Metro remembers this paper, loves this paper. It's sort of this snarky, free newsletter thing. And they needed someone who was just good at writing, but unbyline, so you don't have a record that you worked there or whatever. And I was like, that sounds great. Like, I can just write during the day for, 3 to 6 hours or whatever, and then do what I need to do for my real career, my real job, right? I was so convinced that was going to happen. And so when I got the letter, I was like, wait, right now I'm just a copywriter at, the lowest person on the totem pole inside the Washington Post, without a byline, without anything. I'm not even a real reporter. Like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I should probably figure out, like, if I can actually make this a real career. So I sort of, I sort of convinced myself that intelligence isn't that different than reporting, right? You have sources. You have to have a network of nodes and people who are telling you information about whatever you're covering. You have to be really good at asking questions. You have to be good at listening, reading people, knowing what's true, knowing what's false, making decisions very quickly. And I, part of me was like, okay, if I can't do that as a, in the agency, like I could do that at the Washington Post. I just have to convince them to let me do it. And turned out to be the most opportune time to be in media for a young person.
Really?
Because I was cheap. I was making $30,000 a year. And I would write as much as they wanted me to. I'm like, I have no obligations, right? I can come in on Sundays. I can do whatever story you want me to do. So I found an editor inside the Washington Post, and she's like, you can write as many stories as you want. We just need people to fill the actual physical paper, because they were slashing the people who were, well-known reporters left and right, because the business was going under. And
why was it going under?
I mean, just the business of media with the internet. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had everyone thinks that the media really started declining like maybe 2014, 2015, 2016, but the first wave of real layoffs were like 2008, 2009, where there was just an understanding that Google, and then Facebook, but Google really was just eating the lunch of these companies. The business models of every major newspaper up until this point, of regional newspapers, were classifieds, subscriptions, and then syndication. So syndication, sending out the story, people paying to have to reprint it. That was Google. Google completely took that, right? Like, so all of the stories would go on the internet for free. No one was paying for the digital copy. The Wall Street Journal figured it out, but none of the other papers did. So they were just hemorrhaging subscribers. And then the advertising, it was like, well, if people are advertising online, like, why am I going to advertise, my store in your newspaper? No one's reading the physical paper anymore. Mm-hmm. But they still had it, and they still had, subscribers that were reading it. So it was actually a great time to go in and just be like, okay, like I'll work for basically, very little. and I'll work a lot and I'll fill your paper. And so after about a year of that, they brought me on full time as a staff writer, because I was breaking stories and things as someone who really wasn't affiliated with the paper. But it was not what I wanted to do. It was not like my dream was to be, a reporter. But there was something about just being in that place at the right time where I was like, okay, I can make something out of this major setback, or this thing that I thought was a major setback. And I can learn a new trade, even if it's not, the thing that I thought I would be doing.
So did you develop your own sources and all of that network?
Yeah.
How'd you do it? Where'd you start?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because it's also what venture capitalists do. Like, how do you get dropped into a culture you know nothing about, which was the case with VC, and start meeting people and start building up relationships? And I think, the interesting thing about doing it as a reporter is they give you a beat. Like, my beat in the beginning was like retail and the business of, almost like the business of arts and culture. And then it moved on to like nonprofit investigations. So I started researching like the Smithsonian Institution and all of the government-funded agencies in Washington, D.C., and art agencies and different things, and sort of where they were getting their money from, and kind of follow the money, but of the nonprofit areas. But it started out as like, okay, like you get your assignment, and then you just start calling people. And the thing I know you know better than anyone else is like, people just love to talk. People will tell you anything if you will sit there and listen. And when you're a 24 or 25-year-old who knows nothing, and you call someone and you say, hey, I'm, this reporter from the Washington Post. Can we get coffee? I'd just love to hear more about what you know. Can you show me what I should know about this beat? Like you do that over and over and over again, and people will tell you what you need to know. And then they start seeing your name in the paper. And then they know that you're the person who's going to write the story about something. I also think there's something to, some people are really good at listening, and it's a gift. Growing up in a big family was probably that. A loud Irish family, I learned how to listen. But I'm always amazed at like the stories I would break. It would just be someone coming up to me at a cocktail party or a book party or something, not even necessarily knowing that I was a Washington Post reporter, finding out and then just kind of sharing, just getting it off their chest, and me saying, that's actually a really important story. Can I write it? But I think people are desperate to talk, and they're desperate to get that type of attention. And so it really, like, in some ways, I think the reporting thing was easier than when I got to Silicon Valley and was nobody, right? It was like I was the Washington Post in Washington, D.C.
You've already built it. You've already built a network at that point.
Yeah, but not a network in Silicon Valley.
But you had the fundamentals down.
I think you can get dropped into any culture and learn it very quickly. If you know the types of people that are going to talk to you, and if you're actually willing to listen.
What got you, so you're at the Washington Post. What ended it?
So I kind of knew it was going to be a temporary thing just because of how bad the business was. I mean, It was all we talked about was, this was before Jeff Bezos bought the paper. And I actually decided to leave right as he was buying it. And a lot of people, said that was the saving grace of the paper. One of the richest men in the world buying it, putting money into it so that it wouldn't go down the drain. But what happened actually was my best friend at the Washington Post, she was the religion reporter. Her husband was in the Navy, and he had just left the Navy, and he was going to Stanford Business School. And I knew nothing about business school. I was stunned he got in. I was like, I didn't know your husband knew anything about business. I thought he was in the Navy. And she's like, no. Like, the business schools take like 5% of their class every year. They call them non-traditional candidates. A lot of them are veterans. But they'll take people who know nothing about business to just kind of almost like create a like an interesting group of people for the class, right? Like, you're not there because they think you're going to be great at business. They want to create a diverse sort of class of experiences. And she's like, he got in, like, he this is how he got in. Like, he spent hours every day learning the GMAT. Like, she told me kind of how he did it. And I was like, I've never had any interest in business until working at the Washington Post, where I see this grand paper just completely collapsing in on itself. Like, the most important lesson to me at the Washington Post was it was like watching the leadership. It was, the phrase rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Everyone who worked there was in complete denial that the internet was changing their business.
Are you serious?
It was shocking to me.
What is it? Is it ego?
It's ego. It's desperation. It's I don't want to lose my job. It's we're bigger than this. We're the Washington Post. We're the brand. We're like, everyone needs us. But I think this is true of humans that are in these kind of grand institutions, they can't recognize when something's crumbling. You see it happening with universities today, where these universities are sort of in some ways in major crisis because of what the students are doing, and they just can't ever see that things need to be reformed. Federal government too can't see that things need to be reformed. But that was certainly like a learning for me where I saw it, because I wasn't wedded to it. I hadn't been there during the heyday where, everyone was getting to fly wherever they wanted. They could be bureau chief of any country they wanted to be bureau chief of. I mean, we had shuttered all of our international bureaus by the time I had gotten there. So it was a paper that was clearly in decline, and I saw it. For me, it was just, okay, this is a job, I can learn something, and like original dream didn't work out, but I knew I had to leave. And when she told me that her husband got in, I was like, well, I'm different. I know nothing about business. If there's really no, you just have to, get a decent score on a test and write a good essay. I'm like, I know I can write an essay. That's like probably one of the few things I can do. So I got really, really lucky. I got off the wait list last minute. I actually found out I was on the wait list on a reporting trip to Beirut. I was on the plane, and I was like checking my phone, and you're supposed to get a phone call from the dean of the school, and like no one's ringing. And as I'm like taking off to go to Beirut from DC, I'm like, I'm not getting in. Like, I'm just going to be a reporter forever. And I land and see the email, and it's like, you're on the wait list. And I'm like, okay, that's not a no. That doesn't mean they want me, but it's not a no. And so I sent a letter pretty much every day. I was like, I'm in Beirut. Every time I would go to a new place to do a story, I was like, this is the story I'm working on, and I think it's relevant to the class because of this. And I think after enough annoying emails, and this is a really important life learning, but if you're the most annoying person to any admissions group, but like really to any company, if you're just like constantly pounding down the table, or any customer, like people just finally give in. Like people will not say no 25 times. So I got in last minute, and that it was like, okay, I'm going to Silicon Valley, and I'm just going to figure it out.
Wow. So why didn't you look at any of the other intelligence agencies? Just out of curiosity.
Well, it's interesting. My the woman, the mentor who had been at CIA, she was like, do not go to CIA, go to State. And I was like, that sounds boring. I don't want to go to the State Department, right? Like there were certain things where I was just like, that's not going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. And I also think like when I look back at my career, everything I've done has been like information trading, but it's been very human centric. I wasn't interested in NSA and like I like the human connection. Like I've never it's like even in my business career, I was never interested in things that didn't have like where you're negotiating with people, which is a lot what VC is. I know we'll get into it, but there's something about the human component where I think that's what I wanted to do. And it was also, I don't know, I was probably so dejected. I didn't have that many mentors, where I didn't have people who were like, oh, well, you should go this path, or you should do this, or talk to this person. It was more like, okay, they rejected me. Like there must be a reason. And maybe I'm supposed to be doing something else.
So how'd you, out of all the different business avenues you could have done, why Silicon Valley?
So, I mean, Silicon Valley was more of, okay, like the biggest story that I'm writing about. Like, and you see patterns in the stories you write, and the stories you write every day sort of tell the story of the country, of the ethos. I was actually a culture writer too. So I had a really broad swath of things I could write about, but a lot of things I was writing about were how technology is impacting this industry, or how technology is destroying another industry. And just the conversation at the Washington Post day in, day out was, we're all going to lose our jobs because, Facebook is gaining momentum and everyone wants to read their news on Facebook. Like there's no business model. And so there was something of, I really want to, like, to me, this is the biggest story of my life. Like tech is the biggest story. I don't understand it. And a lot of the Washington Post people I worked with, they hated tech, right? Like tech is what's destroying their livelihood, and they have every right to hate it. Mm-hmm. But me, I was like, I want to understand it. Like I want to go out here and understand this culture. Like I don't know nothing about it. I've never met anyone who's worked in tech or Silicon Valley, but like it's clearly having an impact. And this is like the biggest story of our time. And I'm a reporter. Like I should go out and kind of figure out what's going on out there.
What year is this?
This was 2014. So it was right sort of, it's funny, when I arrived, and this is like a funny thing people always say about Silicon Valley, they say, you always feel like you're too late, like you missed the big ones. So I had missed Facebook. I had missed Airbnb. It was these Palantir. It felt like I had missed Palantir in 2014, which is comical because, even last year, you couldn't have missed Palantir, right? It's like that company is a rocket ship. So it's, in some ways, it's like you always feel like you've missed the boat. But when I got out there, in some ways, not knowing anything was really helpful because I just was sort of this, former reporter emailing people, just trying to figure out what's going on. And you and I talked about this earlier. Silicon Valley is, for all of its weirdness, the best part about Silicon Valley is everyone is afraid they're going to miss the next thing. Mm-hmm. And so a young person with no experience with a Stanford emailing you saying, hey, I'm a former reporter and I'm really interested in your job, or I'm really interested in your company. Can I sit down with you for 30 minutes or get coffee or get on the phone and just hear about what you do? People will pick up that, people will take that call. And so that's kind of what I did. I was like, I am so confused. It was the worst culture shock of my life. I'd been around the world, but I had not experienced sort of that insular culture of how tech companies are built. And I'm always impressed with how many people picked up that call.
So hold on. So you were 100% out of Washington Post by this time, right?
Yeah. So I quit my job.
So you quit your job.
Yeah.
And just inserted yourself in the middle of Silicon Valley and just started emailing people.
Yeah.
And did you have any idea what your business was going to be?
No.
What you were going to be doing?
No.
You just immerse yourself in it to figure it out.
No, and it's interesting because I know Dino has been on your show and he talked about what it was like as a veteran going to business school, right? Like you go to business school and you think, oh, I got 2 years to figure it out. It's like you get to business school and recruiting starts immediately for jobs. I had no idea. I was like, what do you mean? I have no idea what I'm going to do. I'm a former reporter. So there was sort of this kind of, you feel like you're on sort of really shaky ground, but my personality is I do very well in those situations. I do very well when I have no idea what I'm going to do and I have to make a next move. So crazy story of how I ended up in venture capital is it was 2014 in the fall. And I always joke, no one in business school reads books, and they have a library at the business school that has only business books, but they don't have real books. And I'm a reader. And I walked into the library one day and there's this new book called 0 to 1. And it's on the shelf, and it's by this guy named Peter Thiel. And I had heard of Peter Thiel because I was a reporter, and I had read about the Facebook IPO and things, and so I knew who he was, but I didn't know he was as big of a deal as he has now become and kind of is in Silicon Valley. So I reached out to Peter Thiel. And what's crazy about this is, again, I wasn't expecting a response. I was very good at reaching out to people, but not everyone would respond. And I didn't get a response from him, but he had forwarded my email to one of his kind of junior partners, principals at his firm Founders Fund, named Trey Stevens. And Trey and I had overlapped in school. He had actually been at one of the agencies. And whatever I said in my email or whatever kind of context he had, Peter thought we would hit it off. And so I started talking to Trey, who was brand new in venture capital. Peter had brought him on from Palantir to really look at national security and defense. And I kind of told Trey my story. I was a former reporter. It turns out he had at one point wanted to be a reporter in his life. So we really just hit it off talking. And I said, I'm really bored in business school. I need to do something this summer, but I'd also love to just work for you guys. Can I just intern with you? And again, to the point of people will not say no more than 5 or 6 times. He said no probably 5 or 6 times. He's like, we don't have a job for you. What are you going to do here? You don't know anything about technology. You literally just showed up. It's nice. We could talk. I could try to help you and things, but you really should work at a company. We can't have you in our firm. And I just kept emailing hey, I don't really want to work at any of these companies. Can I please work for you? And after about 4 or 5 no's, he finally said, okay, fine. You can come work at Founders Fund. So, Founders Fund's a pretty iconic venture firm. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it at the time. But they've invested in SpaceX. Trey would go on to be the chairman of Anduril. He would go on to incubate that company with Palmer. Wow. But this was a year and a half before that happened.
So what do they have somebody with no tech background doing in a tech firm?
I helped Trey just look at companies. So I sat in on every pitch. We were just kind of surveying the landscape of, which companies are operating in the defense space. Are there any sort of government companies that are actually interesting? We met the Shield AI team. There were a handful of people in and around the space, but not very many. And I always say it was like a gift, right? Because it wasn't like I was giving them anything, right? They would tell me, hey, maybe look for some companies or whatever. And I would try to find things that could be relevant for the national security mission. But it was really a gift. And that is, frankly, that's how all of tech works, where someone gives you a break. And if you show up early You're the first person there. You work your ass off. Like you do any job they want you to do. Like that's often what it's like to be in a startup. And I always tell, I coach a lot of veterans because I have so much empathy for, you're coming from a culture that is so different, right? Like veterans will email me and they'll say, Miss Boyle. And I'm like, do not call me Miss Boyle. Call me Katherine. Like you call a 70-year-old like famous venture capitalist by their first name. Like you have to shed whatever you have learned in your previous life and realize you're going into a totally new culture and you have to blend in on that culture. Like you have to learn the culture. Like that's what your first year in Silicon Valley should be. And you should go to a crazy early stage startup or a venture firm that's totally different than anything you've seen, and you should just listen. Because once you learn the culture and once you learn the language, then you can be an operator. But you have to learn the culture and you have to respect it. So, first day at Founders Fund, actually, one of the EAs came over to me. I was wearing heels, and I can dress like this now because I'm a Florida lady, but I was in San Francisco. And I was wearing heels and, like nice, like I dressed like I was going to a nice internship. And she's like, you need to take that off. I'm going to get you a SpaceX hoodie. Like you need to wear jeans. You need to blend in here. Like this is not going to work if you can't blend in. And I'm very grateful for that because it's like, she's right. Like you're learning a new culture. Like you were learning like how to operate inside of an ecosystem that's nothing like what you've experienced before. And when you understand it, then you can start being, kind of yourself. You can start being a little more flamboyant when you're accepted, when people accept you as one of their own. But when you're learning the culture, like you're there to listen and you're there to work your ass off. And that's kind of what I did. And it was an incredible gift to be able to see how companies that are, so iconic that no one believed in, even 2015, SpaceX was still seen as, oh, well, how big can that company become? It wasn't what it is today. And so to see people, how they make bets on the future and sort of the philosophy of how they take bets on the future, like that completely transformed, like, and sort of catapulted me into venture capital.
Wow. What's the first company that you found interesting that you presented?
Well, when I left business school and I ended up working at another venture capital firm, that was right when Palmer and Trey and Brian and the guys were founding Anduril. And so I had the luxury of spending, a year with these people, like really understanding how well they understood the mission, understanding like how valuable Palantir talent is to people who've actually worked with the government and sort of that model. So I was probably 6 months into the job at this new fund, and again, like lowest on the totem pole, like
lowest again.
Yes. Oh yeah, because you come out of school and then you're the junior associate who's there to take notes, write memos. You're there to learn the trade. It's an apprentice job. You can ask questions, but like you're there to source too. You're also there to find companies and to be the first person to touch a company and bring it in. And so it's actually a funny story. I was with Trey at In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's investment arm. They have a big conference every year. And we were at that conference and he's like, we're starting the company. It wasn't even named Anduril yet, but he's like, we're starting the company. I knew what that meant. He's like, Palmer has just been fired from Facebook. He cares a lot about defense. I think we can convince, the head of engineering at Palantir. I think we can convince, some of these guys to join, and we're going to start it. And I just said, I don't care. And of course, I didn't have the authority to say this, but I said, I don't care whatever you're doing. Like, I want to be an investor in it. I want our firm to be an investor in it. I'm going to get it done. Of course, I can't make that promise because I'm nobody, right? But I immediately, drive home, call the partners and say, like, Palmer Luckey's starting this company and we need to be a part of it. And usually in Silicon Valley, they'd be like, oh, that's great. Like this famous founder who sold a company to Facebook for $3 billion is starting a new company. We want in. We want in on the second time founder who knows how to do it. But it was like, Palmer Luckey? The guy who just got fired for the Hillary billboard, like the fascist, the fascist guy in Silicon Valley. And what's this company do? Well, they're building a border security company. Oh, they're building a border security company to help ICE. It was immediately I was sort of outed in my firm as, okay, Katherine's kind of insane, but they're like, we're not going to do that. And it was, pushing, I pushed a bunch and finally we got a tiny little check-in, and the conversation wasn't even about the company. The conversation was about, well, if it's this small of a check, like we'll see what happens, right? But it sort of like kind of skirted in a small check into the seed round, but that kind of gave me entree.
What's a small check?
Like a couple $1 million. And they had raised what was at the time a very big seed round. It was a $17 million round. And people thought that was insane. I mean, now you're seeing seed rounds of like hundreds of millions of dollars. But this was because, Palmer was extraordinary. He was an extraordinary founder, had an extraordinary exit. But there was definite concern, particularly among the early investors of, okay, like, is this a company that's even going to be able to raise capital? Because no one actually believes that you can sell into the Department of Defense. Maybe the border security thing can happen, but like, this is so crazy. Like everyone felt like they were, kind of, I don't want to say throwing away their money, but it's like, this is kind of a crazy, it's a huge crapshoot. And then it was about like a year and a half of like really working with them. Because I was young, I was enthusiastic, but Joe Lonsdale, who had already sold multiple companies, he was involved in the company. There were a handful of other people involved. But for the first, the first big round that they were doing about a year and a half later, I was like, I want to lead this round. I want to I want our firm that I was at to do the big investment into your company. And it took, 6 months of diligence and meeting with, as many different types of customers and, operators, anyone who could possibly talk about what their tech was doing, and to really showcase it to our firm. And, the kind of crazy thing that happened was like the story of, I think it was like 2019 when they went out to raise, Palmer pitches, what they've done, and they already have, towers on the border that are actually working. Like they're already selling to the Department of Defense. They've moved exceptionally fast. And he goes into the room after I've done, all this work to try to show that this is an incredible investment. And one of the partners kind of raises his hand at the very end and says, like, are you ever going to build missiles? Or are you ever going to build weapons? And Palmer says, of course. Like, we're going to build what the DoD wants us to build to protect the warfighter. Like, great answer. Like, he leaves the room and people are like, we cannot invest in this company anymore. And we cannot invest in this company because...
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And that was how they were viewed across a lot of Silicon Valley. It's like too much headline risk, too much fear, that Palmer's a little bit of a wild card, but also it was like, we're not going to support the Trump administration and the things that we can't do that. We're Silicon Valley. Like we'll lose our shirt, our LPs will be upset, right? And it took to the credit of the firm I was at, it took maybe 3 days where I said, no. Like these guys understand ethics. They understand just war theory. I ended up writing like a 16-page memo in addition to like the investment memo that talks about like the numbers and how big this company can get on just war theory, on like, why this is an ethical product, like how the DoD thinks about ethical products. Trey got on the call with all the partners, and he has a theology background as well, and was talking about, why they're seeing this as an ethical company. I mean, just things you shouldn't have to do, right? Like if you're in Washington, D.C., if you're in a place that understands defense, you should not have to explain why supporting the DoD is good. But this was right after Project Maven. It's right after the Google employees walked out and said, we are not supporting the Trump administration and the DoD. And, I haven't told this story before, but I had this moment where they were debating the ethics, and I was asked to leave the room because I wasn't one of the managing partners, and it was the partnership was going to make a decision. And I walked down across the street to this church in St. Dominic's in San Francisco, and I just kneeled down and I prayed to God. I was like, okay, there's a reason why I've spent a year and a half on this company. Like this is the most important thing I've ever done, trying to get capital into this company, and if it doesn't happen, I'm going to walk in there tomorrow and I'm going to quit my job. Because you don't want me in venture capital. This is not where you want me to do. I'll figure out something else, right? I've done that before. I've changed my career. I've done things before. But if indeed this goes through and we end up leading this investment into this company, this will be my mission. Investing in America. This is it. This is all I care about. And these are the companies I want to invest in. This is what America needs more than anything. Silicon Valley doesn't get it yet, but they're going to. And the minute I leave that church, walking back home, 5 minutes later, I get a call from one of the managing partners, and he's like, you have the green light. Go give Palmer a term sheet.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah. So it was a crazy story, but that was my first big investment in defense.
Good pick.
It's been a good one.
I mean, how long did it take you to get that kind of insight to know, to feel, that this is the company?
So a lot of it comes from the people, and that's I don't know much about technology. right? Like I've never built anything in technology. I'm not a technologist by nature. I've learned a lot having been in the industry for 10 years, but that's not how I make decisions. There's a lot of venture capitalists. They always say that venture capitalists have sort of three different dimensions they judge. They judge the market, how big is the market size? DoD has a very big market, small market for startups, but a very big market. It's 800 billion and growing every year, right? It's a massive, massive budget. The product. So a lot of technologists, people who are really, really good at, they've worked at Facebook or Google or these different companies. They come out, they become VCs, and they always want to talk about the technology. How does it work? How does it operate? And those are people who, oftentimes they're genius level. We have a lot of them on our team, but they know how technology works and they have a theory of where technology is going. I don't care about any of that. Like all I care about is the people. And I'm almost maniacally focused on it. I want to know their story. I want to know who they know. I want to know their network. I want to map their network because I want to know who their first 10 hires are. I want them to tell me who their first 10 hires are so that I can verify those people are probably going to join them. Like I want to understand sort of the network node of who these people are and how it's going to expand. And I always say like early stage investing, the best early stage investors are building relationships with someone who's going to build a company before that person even realizes that they're going to build a company. Like it's in some ways there's a lot.
Say that again.
The best thing you can do as an early stage investor is to build relationships with people who are, director of, of technology or some sort of, I would say very good engineer at a company where, in 2 or 3 years, they're probably going to leave and start a company, but they don't know that yet. They have no idea that that's on their horizon, but they're going to be a great founder. And so you start building a relationship for them so that when they do leave, you're their first call. And so it actually has a lot, there's a lot in common with intelligence operations where if someone's going to flip, right? After spending years of time with them or months of time with them, right? Like if someone is going to give you good information even before they know. And it's the same thing with sourcing and reporting. Like you can spend a lot of time with a source and them give you nothing. And then, 6 months into building the relationship, they have a story they want to give you. The best reporters are like that. Same is true of venture capitalists. It's figuring out who are the people who matter and making sure that they call you first. And so, that then became, I'd say after Anduril, it became clear that like, Catherine's going to invest in this stuff, right? Like, it's like, this is what she cares about. I started writing very publicly about it. A lot of people weren't even talking about it, right? Like people were still afraid of it. There were firms that, still couldn't invest in it because their limited partner agreement, the sort of governing docs of how the funds they operate work, said they can't touch weapons. So there were firms in Silicon Valley that could not invest in Anduril because their limited partners wouldn't let them. But even after in 2019, like when I made that investment, the number of founders who said like, one, you're an idiot, like that's a dumb investment, they're never going to make it. Like that was common. But there was another class of people who said like, wow, you're a fascist too. Like you're a bad person. Like you must really, you're really on that MAGA train. Like just like the horrible things people would say. And it's like, I care a lot about my country. That's why I'm doing it. And I think there's a business opportunity here, right? It's not just, oh, I'm a patriotic capitalist and I'm throwing money away. Like I think this is the biggest business opportunity of our time, and it's sitting right in front of my face, and no one's looking at it. And so I'm going to invest in it, and I'm going to be the first call of these people who want to work here.
Wow. That's some serious insight. I mean, at that time, you just brought it up, but there was a strike at Google. Whatever you want to call it, anti-Trump, but it seemed like anti-US, like nobody wanted to upgrade our defense tech. And you're on the precipice of that change. What was it that changed? It seems like Silicon Valley's done a complete 180 now.
Yes. A lot has changed. And I think it was multiple things changing at the same time. So the first thing that changed is Silicon Valley likes winners. We're very mimetic. It's like VCs will feel very strongly about, oh, I don't want to work with a defense company in 2017. And those same VCs will be begging to get in a round 3 or 4 years later. Mm-hmm. So things move very fast in Silicon Valley. People will completely update their knowledge. And so what I think happened is SpaceX became an extraordinary company. Palantir went public. And people started realizing, oh, there are examples of companies that have just really taken off. Anduril changed this for defense, where in the early days it was controversial, but the minute that Anduril just started getting all of the great engineers, really just crushing it on the contracting side and just building really cool products. Silicon Valley just loves to be around cool things. And the thing that I think Elon did for the rest of the ecosystem is he made hardware manufacturing, he made space, he made these really difficult things cool again in a way that no one had ever. I mean, aerospace before him was just like a backwater. No one was majoring in aerospace engineering in colleges. No one wanted to work at those companies. And the first 10 years of SpaceX were hard. But like by 2015, 2016, they were, re-landing rockets. Like they were doing some really cool stuff. They were about to, in 2019, they were about to, start Starlink, which was, kind of this crazy idea that no one thought was going to work. And look at it now. So it's like Silicon Valley likes winners. And so the minute that they started seeing winners, it's like, oh, okay, like you can make money doing this. And so that kind of brought along, I'd say, the rest of the ecosystem, people who maybe weren't as interested in DoD, but they started seeing, things change. And then on the DoD side, I mean, I would actually say that this movement was really created by the DoD. Like former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter in 2015 launched DIU. And he was the first person, I think, inside, it was during the Obama administration, he said, you have all these incredible engineers in Silicon Valley. None of them know anything about the military. Like they don't see anyone in the military. We're not out there, right? Like in Washington, D.C., if you live in D.C., you go on the metro, you see people in uniform, they're headed to the Pentagon. It's part of your life. So you're not as weirded out by defense culture. It's part of daily life. Silicon Valley, they don't see anything. And a lot of these people, many people are new to America. Like they have very different views, right? So his view was we have to go out
Interesting.
to Silicon Valley and like actually have an outpost there. So we started DIU as an experiment. It's now much bigger. And
What is DIU?
Defense Innovation Unit. So it was the DoD initiative of we have to make, again, it was as much a relationship initiative, and now it's a contracting initiative. They actually have real budget, and the third iteration of how it's structured. But in the beginning, it was like, we just got to go out and like introduce ourselves to these people and like show them who we are, show them what we care about. These are the things we like understand. Again, people on the ground understand the technologies that are being built, really create a kind of real communication. And so, you had the DoD really focused on this. Then you had winners in Silicon Valley, people who had been at SpaceX for 10 years leaving and saying, well, maybe I'll start a company in deep tech or hard tech or physical world. And what should I do? Well, maybe defense is where I want to do it. Maybe I want to do another aerospace company. Maybe I want to build a nuclear company. And so you just had this exodus of extraordinary talent who had all been trained by Elon. And now it's happening with Anduril too, all been trained by Palmer, where they just know how to manufacture things. And it's been extraordinary to watch the number of young people who spend a couple years at a great company. Palantir has this tradition as well, where it's like it just mints founders of new companies that operate in the government space. So it's like, one, you have winners. Two, you have the customers changed his view. And then the last thing that I think really changed was COVID happened. I think people sort of lifted their head and said, okay, like something is wrong with America. And people started really thinking about how do you solve real problems. And then right after that, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, that changed everything for a young generation of engineers who had never seen war, right? Like they're like 20 years old. They'd have no memory of September 11th. They maybe had no exposure to military, but like they're watching how FPV drones are being used on the Ukrainian battlefield. And that is inspiring them. Okay, we need to build for this mission.
Interesting. Well, Catherine, let's take a quick break. You've heard me talk about Patriot Mobile for a while now. They've stood in the gap for Americans who believe that faith, family, and freedom are worth fighting for, and they're the real deal. They've got cutting-edge technology, and switching is easy. Keep your number, keep your phone, or upgrade. Their 100% US-based team can activate you in minutes right over the phone. They're one of the few carriers with access to all three major US networks. That means exceptional nationwide coverage. They can even put a second number on a different network on the phone. It's like carrying two phones in one. They have unlimited data plans, mobile hotspots, international roaming, internet on the go devices, and home internet backup. Make the switch today and experience the difference. Go to patriotmobile.com/SRS or call 972-PATRIOT, and right now use the promo code SRS for a free month of service when you sign up. Switch to Patriot Mobile and defend freedom with every call and text you make. That's patriotmobile.com/SRS or call 972-PATRIOT. When the grid fails and no one's coming, you need more than a backup. That's why I want to introduce you to Paladin Power. Most of America's 130-year-old power grid is fragile, outdated, and vulnerable. Paladin Power gives you the ability to operate completely independent of the grid, no matter what happens. Paladin Power builds advanced energy storage solutions, veteran-owned, American-made, and designed to take you off the grid for good. One Paladin unit can run your whole house. HVAC, EV, power tools, everything. Other brands, you need up to 8, 9, or even 10 systems. That's not sustainable or practical. They take up too much space and the costs are outrageous. Paladin's system is smaller, more powerful, and delivers the lowest price per kilowatt hour on the market. It's US made, tariff resilient, warranted for 20 years, and built with modern US manufacturing. Plus, they are actively working to develop a lithium-free, fire-safe system that's years ahead of anything on the market. Head over to paladinpower.com/SRS to learn more. Use code SRS for up to 15% off. That's my code SRS at paladinpower.com/SRS. Managing finances can be stressful. Trying to keep up with subscriptions, tracking spending, and cutting costs can feel overwhelming. Luckily, Rocket Money can relieve some of that stress and help you feel confident in the financial decisions you make. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money shows all of your expenses in one place, including the subscriptions you forgot about. If you see a subscription you no longer want, Rocket Money will help you cancel it. Their dashboard lays out your total financial picture, including bill due dates and paydays, in a way that's easy to digest. You can even automatically create custom budgets based on your past spending. Rocket Money's 5 million members have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, with member savings up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/SRS today. That's rocketmoney.com/SRS. rocketmoney.com/SRS. All right, Catherine, we're back from the break. We kind of talked about a little bit about the culture over there at Silicon Valley. I don't think we got too into it though. So I am curious, what was it 5 years ago?
So, I mean, 5 years, I think a lot of things have changed about how Silicon Valley not only views, American interest, but just the sort of how people view the business opportunity, but also the mission. So I think, talked about how Ukraine really did change everything for these young engineers, but there was this culture, and this is a long-standing culture, say from 2000 all the way up until Anduril even existed, where there was a belief that you could not sell into the Department of Defense. Like functionally, because of the procurement process, it would be impossible for startups, again, that are working, on these 18-month timelines of they take capital, they're supposed to get big as quickly as possible, and hire more people and grow, that they would hit the valley of death of the DoD, and it would be impossible for them to break through. So you had a kind of a financial class, but also founder class that just really didn't think about the DoD. And then it was also sort of this interesting time in Silicon Valley, and I think a lot of people look at kind of the old school Silicon Valley. Bob Noyce, sort of the Fairchild Semiconductor, which was one of the earliest kind of venture-backed big companies, and then Intel. That type of engineer. He was a Iowa farm boy. It was sort of the people who put a man on the moon. Mm-hmm. Those types of engineers were sort of the old school Silicon Valley. And I always think something really shifted. Sometimes people point to the early 2000s. I think Silicon Valley really shifted for a couple of reasons. The first reason I think it shifted was kind of post-Facebook. So Facebook started in 2004 in a Harvard dorm room. A bunch of kids went out, then a bunch of Stanford kids joined it. But what I think Facebook did, it was sort of the first company alongside of Google, was they made tech sexy for a certain type of worker that is not technical, that goes to fancy school. It used to be if you went to a Harvard or Yale, you'd go work on Wall Street. You would go work in, investment banking or something. And around 2008, 2009, that's when you started seeing a lot of these really talented, really bright, but sort of indoctrinated, like Ivy League types come out to Silicon Valley. And they brought with them sort of the same thing that the journalists, have, the same sort of activism, the same sort of, I have a certain set of beliefs about how the world works, and I'm going to bring that into the company culture. Google was really the kind of, they encouraged it. They were sort of bring your whole self to work. Like, it's like we have laundry here and we have, free gyms, all sorts of free perks for you to stay here constantly and work. But it was really like a bring your whole self to work kind of identity thing. And a lot of sort of the kind of radical activism we're seeing on campuses now, but really have seen for like the last 10 years, got imported into Silicon Valley with Facebook, with Google, and with these sort of what we call app companies, sort of the kind of Web 2.0, the big companies of the last generation. Twitter, yeah. The people who were working there weren't sort of yes, they had sort of the cracked engineers, right? But then you also had sort of this keyboard class, this sort of keyboard warrior, where it was really, really sexy to work in tech. It became sort of the sexy, dominant thing coming out of these sort of prestigious schools. And I think they brought a lot of sort of the kind of liberal trends, liberal fads into the companies that looked very different than what tech was in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And it was really, before it was these hardware engineers, these guys who just really wanted to build things, right? And then when you kind of get into post-internet and the app culture, it became something totally different. At the same time, what was also happening in Silicon Valley is, Silicon Valley is about 40 minutes south of San Francisco. So the kind of hubs for Facebook and different places and Google, they're down in what's known as the South Bay. But San Francisco is, it really wasn't a tech city until like 2009, 2010. Twitter headquartered itself in San Francisco in 2009. And you saw a lot of tech workers sort of moving to the city. And San Francisco was one of the most radical, most open, sort of kind of iconoclastic cultural, cities in the world. It's its own weird culture. Anything goes. You kind of get these radical sort of cult-like experiences. There's a great book about San Francisco called Season of the Witch, and it talks about how like the spirit of San Francisco has always been sort of this like people joining cults, the hippie movement. Like these are the most radical people in the world. And you meld that with the tech people who are also sort of iconoclastic, and they're also sort of, they go to schools like Berkeley or, Harvard or places, and they get these sort of radical ideas, and it's like, okay, we're going to bring that into the company. And Twitter actually, I think, became kind of the iconic example of this, where, they became so radicalized about, certain ideas and viewpoints that they would start completely deplatforming people who, misgendered someone, or deplatforming the president of the United States, right after the 2020 election. So it's like the sort of radicalization of Silicon Valley, I think, was happening at the same time that you had this other shift happening, which was, things are going radical. A lot of people, have their sort of extremist, I would say, liberal beliefs, but then you have sort of a backlash to it. And I would say like Anduril in many cases was a huge backlash to it, where it's like, hey, we just want to build stuff for our country. We're not Democrats, we're not Republicans, we're just a bunch of engineers who want to build hard things, and we want to put our heads down and work. And I actually think that's kind of the underpinning of the American Dynamism movement. It's like people got sick of the culture wars, and particularly the culture wars that were being fought all of big tech. Even big tech has gotten sick of it. It's like you kind of see Mark Zuckerberg has completely changed his tune on a lot of things. He's kind of gone, he said the culture became too feminized at Facebook. I mean, what he's really saying is we became way too radical. We became way too hall monitor in our views of social media and free speech. And so I think
you wonder how much it's taken him. How much time was wasted on that kind of stuff.
So much.
And how much more innovation would have happened had they not been so wrapped up in their own ideologies and cultures.
Totally. I mean, like that's why when Elon bought Twitter, I mean, he was saying we could fire 75% of the people at Twitter and the service still ran perfectly, right? What were these people doing? Well, they were, deplatforming people, or they were the trust and safety team, making sure that things on Twitter were fine, right? Like, there's still massive problems at Twitter. I mean, like there were still ridiculous amounts of porn and child pornography on Twitter that they didn't deal with when they were there, right? But Elon got in and saw, he's like, this is completely backwards. We need 1/4 of the people who are here. We need great engineers, and we need to solve the real problems at this platform. And we need to have free speech. So in some ways, it's like a lot of these companies got really fat. The business models were good. They were really bloated, but people weren't working. And what were they doing? They were becoming activists. And I do think there's, across, it's not just tech. It certainly was happening at the tail end of my time at the Washington Post. But, a lot of these young people go, get out of college. They think they're activists. They go work at a company and they want to be activists. They don't want to do the work of the company, which is to build to build an app or to write a story. They want to go there and they want to shake up the company. They want to be activists inside the company. And, what really changed, I think, in Silicon Valley that sort of led people to say, okay, we can build hard things, one. And I think that's why there's a lot of people focusing on, like, let's build things that are so hard that you don't get these activists into your company. But there was another company called Coinbase, where the founder of Coinbase, I believe it was 2020, Brian Armstrong, he wrote a letter called the Coinbase Memo. And he said, if you want to be an activist, and it was during BLM and just after Me Too. And he said, if you're going to be an activist, you can go somewhere else. Our mission is to focus on crypto. It's to focus on ensuring that we have the best, customer support and that we serve our customers who are interested in crypto and we expand that customer base. And if you care about anything else at this company, you can walk out the door. And he lost, I think, 6% of his company that day.
No kidding.
And he's like, he'll say it publicly. That's the best thing he's ever done because those are the 6% of people who were causing a lot of problems. And the same can be said about Google and Project Maven. It's only a tiny portion of people inside of a massive company. I think it was like 2% or 1%, less than 1% of people signed the Project Maven letter and walk out. We're not going to work with the DoD. But that can cause so much damage to a company if a company allows the activist class to control them. So I think the thing that people learn from watching Elon just completely remake Twitter, and now that and Brian, Brian at Coinbase really say like, hey, like see the door, is I think a lot of founders are now saying, hey, we can work on these hard problems. We also don't have to be beholden to an activist class. We have free speech now. We can say what we want on X, right? Like we're not going to get in trouble if you could get reported to HR if you say the wrong name of someone or some wrong word. And I think that was happening at the same time, sort of the backlash against all of the wokeism and sort of, rigid orthodoxy of how you have to act. And that kind of opened up the way for American Dynamism. Because I really think that the companies that are building these hard things in the physical world, like they just want to put their head down and build. They don't want to talk politics. They don't want to know who you voted for. They really just want to build hard things and they care about the country. And it's like that they care about the mission they are working on.
How long was this process? Because like I said, from an outsider, it looks like it was in about a year.
Yeah.
Like
it's
like
shifted.
a light switch.
Yes.
To get rid of that rot.
Yeah.
Was it a lot longer than that?
It's a lot longer. I mean, for someone, so I can say like, there were a handful of us. You've had Joe on, you've had Palmer on, you've had people on who, Shawn at Palantir, like, right? There's a handful of people who I think have been sort of saying the same things over and over and over again about like, it is okay to build for government. It's okay. My own sort of kind of experience of where I saw just a huge change is I was having lots of conversations with Mark Andreessen, who's the founder of our firm, about a lot of the issues that were happening in Silicon Valley. I kind of told him, I said, I think that this category of investment is not just, it's not just one-off companies. It's not just going to be SpaceX and Anduril, but there's going to be an explosion of these companies. And this was during COVID. So I wrote this memo for him. I ended up joining the firm. My partner, David Yulovich, and I, we always joked we were sort of competing for the same companies, but there was such a small group of people who were competing to get on the same deals. He called me one day after we had dinner with Mark, and he was like, do you just want to come do it here? Like, just come here and help build, like, let's build a practice together around these ideas. And so, I always give major credit to Mark and David for having the foresight of saying, hey, like, this is a real thing. Because a lot of people didn't think it was real. A lot of people thought, okay, yeah, you'll have an Anduril, but there's only going to be one Anduril. You'll have a SpaceX, there's only going to be one SpaceX. But all of these other young companies, the Dinos of the world, the Shield AIs, like these companies, they're we only need one of each. And our view was like, this is the next 10, 20, 30 years of American innovation. If the first 25 years of the second American century, right, 2000 to 2025, if that was investing in apps, investing in software eating the world, the next 25 years are taking all of that software and building for the physical world. So it's critical minerals, it's aerospace, it's defense, it's infrastructure, logistics, all of the things that touch the physical world. And so it was actually January 2022. It was 3 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. I just joined the firm. I put out this manifesto called American Dynamism. And I wrote about how like the next 25 years are going to be these categories and named companies like Anduril. You know, we'd already invested in those companies, knew them very well. But I said, you're already seeing so many extraordinary engineers leaving these companies and wanting to build new versions of Anduril, new versions of SpaceX, right? Like building the next generation of aerospace and defense, public safety, like the entire public safety field has been completely transformed by technology. And we have great companies that are operating with police forces across the country doing really important work using machine learning and AI. And we were seeing this, but it was sort of this kind of secret. People hadn't been talking about it publicly. So we announced the thesis, and I've never seen such an explosion. Like, to me, this was like probably the biggest moment in my career of seeing like the number of people emailing me, retweeting it, saying like, this is where Silicon Valley is going. And within 6 months, the term American Dynamism had become this kind of hilarious internet meme. It was everywhere. People were using it as a joke. People were using it as, hey, I'm an American Dynamism company. Investors were raising funds off of it, saying we want an American Dynamism practice. We ended up raising a very large fund to invest in the category. And it really, like, the thing I think I'm most proud of, because it was a huge shock. It wasn't a shock to the engineers. It wasn't a shock to the veterans, but it was a huge shock to the investor class when we said the word America.
No kidding.
I had been saying American Dynamism for a long time, but I said this practice has to be named American Dynamism. And when people ask us what it is a very clear meme. We're investing in companies that are supporting the national interest, full stop. And we're not going to be ashamed about it. Again, it was 2022. It was before Russia invaded Ukraine. We're not going to be ashamed of it. But like, by their nature, these companies have to sell to the DoD. They sell to the DoD before they sell to other countries. They're not global companies. They are American companies. They are very different than the software that sells all over the world that can operate on the internet. These are physical different things. And we have to be very clear with our language that these are American companies. And the investor class, I think, was stunned, mainly because a lot of our rival firms were still investing in China. Like, they had still made so much money in China, and this is a whole other story. But when we said America, it was like we planted the flag of our own country and said, yeah, we're going to build for this country. And it was probably the most refreshing thing to founders, because they had never heard an investor. They had never heard, and again, having Marc Andreessen say it, it's like, I'm just little old me, right? But when Marc Andreessen, the founder of the internet, basically, right? Like the godfather of Silicon Valley, comes out and he says, we're investing in America, people perk up and they listen. And so it completely changed the game. Later it became a meme. Other people started raising funds off of it. But the thing I think I'm most proud of is within a year, a lot of peer funds, or what's called peer funds, like firms of our size, or other famous firms that operate in the Valley, almost all of them had decoupled from their China practices.
No kidding.
At the same time, like Mike Gallagher and the China special committee that was happening in Congress, and a bunch of people in the DC side, they kind of woke up about this. It's like, okay, Silicon Valley is actually, Silicon Valley is saying, hey, we need to invest in America too. Like important people in Silicon Valley are saying that. And so, they started putting, I think, a little bit of pressure. The TikTok wars were happening, right? Like, people were really starting to say, okay, like, how is TikTok being weaponized against American kids? And it just became too much for a lot of these firms who had been investing for 15 years in China to be able to make a good faith argument that it's fine that we're sending American money, American know-how, and that we're making tons of money off of technology that's being used as a weapon against the United States. And so pretty much all of these firms had to divest, or decouple themselves. They turned into separate funds where there was no sharing of information, no sharing of carry, of sort of the economics among the partners. But I think 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed that would have happened. It was too much money. It was too big business. People had way too many entrenched interests in China. And if anything, what it taught me is, if you speak truth, like if you say, I'm not afraid to say I love this country and that I don't care about making money in China because I love this country. And if you say that, people will get in line. Like, most people believe that in Silicon Valley. They just never heard it before.
That's great. Man, kudos to you. That's incredible.
I mean, it's in some ways, it shows the power of memes, because it really only takes, one Joe, one Mark, right? One of these guys, right? One Shawn, one Palmer to stand up and say the hard thing. And if you say it enough, like Palmer had been saying since 2017, like the CCP is our enemy, right? Like the CCP is our enemy. We should not be supporting, anything with to do with China. We should not be supporting them. We should not be investing there. And it just, in some ways, it's like it wears people down if people hear the meme long enough. And in some ways, I feel like the sort of meme of American dynamism is even more powerful than the investing practice. It's not just an investing practice. It's a true philosophy that, like, if we're going to build hard things in this country and go back to an era of the moon landing and the Manhattan Project, like, we have to be clear about what we are investing in, and we are investing in American interest.
How did you meet Mark?
So it's a funny story. I'd say there were a handful of people, I think, during COVID who kind of saw the craziness that was happening in Silicon Valley, kind of saw the craziness of the culture war. This has been reported before, but Mark's very big on the group chats. So I met him through actually this is very funny. I met him through, there was an app in COVID called Clubhouse. Where it was sort of like
I remember Clubhouse.
Yeah, sort of like Twitter Spaces.
It's like, yeah.
But I was very bored. I was also pregnant with my first child. I was kind of locked up in my house. And I always joke, my husband was like, after like the first month of COVID, it was great that you had Clubhouse because you could talk to other people. You could stop annoying me. So I was like, up at the middle of the night talking on Clubhouse. And of course, there were a handful of people there, and Mark was one of them. So I got to know Mark through Clubhouse and through, a lot of these, I'd say, these kind of, chats of people who I think were really interested in these ideas of where is Silicon Valley going? What does it mean? Again, like this was sort of the height of the culture war. And I do think it was forbidden. It was like, people were getting left and right kicked off of Twitter. And so there were sort of these, underground. And it's kind of funny to say now because all of the things that were being said are being said publicly now. It's not like there was sort of some crazy, conversations happening, but it really was sort of this, you were so forced to sort of falsify your preferences publicly if you didn't want to get canceled, that you really couldn't talk about things. And you could on Clubhouse in some ways, and you could in the group chats. And so I got to know Mark and David and a bunch of people at Andreessen Horowitz. And, I'd say a lot of these ideas were really sort of, talked about and sort of debated on an app that, was sort of this ephemeral thing that was really important during COVID because no one had a way to connect. But I also tell people a lot, like especially young people, like you'd be surprised who you can meet on the internet. Like you'd be surprised, like the people you can connect with and have deep relationships with, even if you haven't, had lunch with them. Like you don't have to go to someone's, house or office and have coffee with them. Like you can have deep connections with people just by writing and thinking online. And, I spend a lot of time on the internet. And I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's like I need to spend a lot of time on the internet. But that's how I got, acquainted with Mark and with a lot of people in Silicon Valley and with a lot of people at my current firm, too.
It's just really incredible that, you come from a zero tech background into where you are today. I think that's just really fascinating.
Yeah.
But
I do think, it's I look at someone like Dino, who I think your conversation with him is extraordinary, right? Like in some ways he's the example of speed running that process even more, right? Because it's like he's the CEO of a massive company and he had no tech relationships. It's like he knew a little bit about tech, but he's not a cracked engineer himself, right? Like he went from being a Navy SEAL to now running one of the most important companies for the Navy in 3 years. Right? Like, I mean, he went to business school. Yes, he went to private equity, but like the things he was doing in private equity are not at all like what he's doing here. And so I think it says something about the culture of tech, which is, and I always tell veterans this because I get, so many people saying, how do you transition? It's like, it is a very open culture. By its nature, people are open about meeting people, talking to people. Yes, it's kind of monolithic, but if you have an idea that's different, there are people who will take a bet on you if you seem to know what you're talking about, if you know the right people, if you have a talented team surrounding you. And so I do think it's probably one of the few places that like misfits can go in America. It's like you couldn't go to New York City and kind of crack your way into different parts of finance. It's like there's too many places in New York where they care who your daddy is or, what school you went to, what high school you went to, right? Like there's too much of that kind of elite culture in Washington and New York. But something about Silicon Valley is, you can just be loud on the internet and get people's attention and have everyone important in Silicon Valley talking about you, making fun of you, mocking you, right? But like you can become the center of attention very quickly.
Interesting.
And so I really encourage young people to do that, especially if they're a talented engineer. Like you don't have to know anyone.
How does venture capital work? It seems to me like venture capital runs Silicon Valley, and if I've had a number of these guys in here, all like just it's insanely smart.
Yeah.
But the trend seems to be go to Silicon Valley, start talking about your idea, start working on it, and somebody is going to invest in it.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes. And you'll learn a lot. Like it's not guaranteed someone's going to invest in it, but what's interesting is Silicon Valley used to be like it's like the Florentine five families, right? You have like five venture firms. They all sit on Sand Hill Road, which is like the classic place where all these firms were built. And companies would go by and they'd pitch, and then a firm would pick one company. It's not like that anymore. It is ruthlessly competitive. There is more capital than there has ever been in the asset class. I think there's something like $300 billion of dry powder just raised now, which dry powder is the amount of capital on the sidelines that's going to come into companies. Something like 1.25 trillion AUM. I mean, it is not they used to call it sort of a cottage industry. People used to ignore it. It's not. It is how we've built companies over the last 25 years. I always point to this graph. I wish I had the graphic, where if you looked at the Fortune 100, and then if you even went further down and you said, what are the 10 most valuable companies in the world in 2000? 4 of them were American companies. I think 2 of them were tech companies. If you do that same experiment in 2025, 9 of them are American companies, 8 of them are tech companies. And the only company that's not a tech company, that's the most valuable company in the world in America, is Berkshire Hathaway, which owns a massive chunk of Apple. So tech is the story of the 21st century. It's how we've built companies. A lot of the companies that are now in that the most valuable 10 weren't even founded in 2000, right? Like Facebook wasn't around. Google had just gone public in 2004. It is extraordinary that we have been able to build companies that big that surpass all of industry across the world in 25 years. But part of that is because of the venture capital industry, which is not this cottage industry of a couple of people sitting around doling out money anymore. It is billions of dollars given by what's known as institutional limited partners. So what they are is they're the big pension funds. The big, every state has massive pension funds, nonprofits, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds across the world. So every country has sovereign wealth money that they want to put into various things, and now they all want to put money into technology. And so when you add all of that up and you say everyone recognizes that they need exposure to high growth venture capital backed companies that are going to go public and that are going to be the next Uber, the next Stripe, the next, the next Facebook, the next Google. It's just so much bigger than it was even 10 years ago. And I'd say it's become really competitive because, any really talented engineer now that has a group of people with a good idea, it's never been, I don't want to say it's easy. It's easier to get seed capital. It's easier to get someone to bet on you because there's more capital in the industry. And what was a problem 5 years ago is that because American Dynamism didn't exist, because this category of innovation didn't exist, you couldn't go into a venture capital firm and say, I'm going to build a hypersonics company. People would be like, what? There's no ecosystem of people who are going to invest in that. There's no downstream capital of people in the later rounds. And the way venture capital structured is every 18 to 24 months, a company will raise an additional round of capital. And if they're successful, it makes their valuation go up. It makes the amount the company's worth go up. And it allows them to expand. It allows them to grow the number of engineers, the number of people working there, number of products they're offering. And the goal is don't go out of business, but grow as fast as possible. And each new layer of investor will come in with a bigger check to fund the research and development, to fund the growth of the company until you go public. And And the sort of it sounds completely different if to any other way that we build businesses, but the kind of speed at which you're supposed to grow it's the faster you grow, the better. And so there's sort of a view that that is the best way to build companies, but that did not exist, I'd say, 5 years ago for this category of building the physical world. There's no way that you're going to be able to get through the valley of death, get later investors to put hundreds of millions of dollars into a satellite bus company. And I think the biggest thing that's changed is all of those partners that I talk about, the people who are investing in the funds, the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds, all of those people in the ecosystem now believe that you can make money off of defense companies, and they want exposure to it. They want to invest in the next Anduril. And so to me, whenever I go to the DoD, I'm like, this is the biggest boon for you. Like this is going to save us because you have capital from all over the country, every endowment, all over the world, frankly, that wants to invest in American innovation, American dynamism, and you don't have to use taxpayer money to do the R&D. There's hundreds of companies in El Segundo right now that are all doing the R&D, that are all raising outside capital from people who know that they might lose their money. But that's the business model. You lose your money in some cases. You win in some, you lose in others. And it's like, that didn't used to be directed at America. Like it did not used to be directed at the Department of Defense. It's never been directed at these categories in the way it is today. So it does on the outside look easy, like everyone can just come in and raise capital, but you do have to have a great idea. You have to know the right people. You have to network with the right people, right? Which is not impossible. Like that's what I love about Dino's story is like, he didn't know anybody. He didn't know who Joe Lonsdale was when he took him out to do a workout, right? He just wanted to do a defense company. And so there's so many stories of just being young and hungry and determined and have a good idea, and like the right people will find you.
I mean, when you're looking for these companies, we had talked about it. You look at their network and you look at who they are as a person and their values. I mean, but what about the idea?
So, I mean, the idea matters a lot. I mean, there's examples where I've invested in people pre-idea.
Pre-idea?
Yeah. Like I have a great company called Cape that's building a MVNO, a mobile network for privacy. And the founder, I knew the founder from another company that I had invested in called Manavar Labs. It's working with a lot of the agencies in DoD. He was on the board, and he was the head of government sales, agency sales at Palantir for a very long time. And so he just knows government sales better than anyone. He had been in the Army and then went to Palantir. And I always just said, like, hey, if you're ever leaving Palantir, please let me know. One day I got the call and it was like, I don't care what you're doing. I just want to back you. And within a couple of weeks, he told me what he was doing. And I'm like, oh, you're building a new mobile carrier for privacy? That's going to be like the hardest thing I've ever heard. Like you were building the hardest company. But he's done an excellent job and is working with, a number of different, parts of the DoD to make it possible to basically be on your cell phone and to not be found. I mean, that's sort of like the holy grail if you're an operator, if you're part of the DoD, or if you're a high net worth individual who's worried about privacy, to be able to travel around the world and to not ping different cell towers so that no one can track you. It actually doesn't exist. Like all the different carriers can take your data. And so, yeah, he's a great example of, I didn't care what he did. He just knew, he knew the biggest problem because he had been at Palantir for so long and I wanted to invest in him. And I knew he was going to have a great team. But on the flip side, like most of the time we invest post idea. We invest post, people having a story. And I always think like you're testing for a couple different things. You're testing for how quickly someone can learn and the depth of knowledge. And you know this better than anyone in the interviews that you do. If you just sit there and ask questions, you can learn a lot about how deep someone's knowledge goes, right? Well, tell me more about that. Like, actually, is that how it works? Like, what other companies operate like that?
How do you invest somebody pre-idea, though? I mean, what are you investing in? Well, where do they put the money?
Oh, well, I mean, in John's case, who's the founder of Cape, like, I waited till he had the entity formed, and then we gave him the company. So when I say like we invest before the company even exists, like there's a company. It's just sometimes he doesn't know what he's going to do, right? Like there are some founders where you don't know what. I even say Anduril is a great example of this, where like yes, they started off with Sentry Tower, but like products 3 and 4 and 5, they had no idea what those products were going to be. And some of those have just been extraordinarily successful. And so a lot of founders kind of, they learn on the job, right? Like they're talking to new customers every day, and it's like, actually, maybe we should do this instead. They call it the pivot. In Silicon Valley, it's like, it's infamous. It's like, oh, companies pivoting into a different direction. But a pivot isn't seen as a bad thing. It's seen as, oh, they learned something new and they're taking that knowledge and they're building something with it. It's much more common to invest in a company, at post idea, post team. The pitch deck, is oftentimes explains the problem and the solution. Oftentimes there's a product built. But for early stage investing, which is where I like to invest, sometimes you don't need it. Sometimes it's just about a credible team coming together and you having belief that team can actually pull it off based on their history. A lot of the teams that I've invested in, it's like, the head of manufacturing was doing something at SpaceX, which makes me know that they know how to do manufacturing. Or, the CTO was at, another company where it's very clear that you can reference them and know what they actually built. So their reputation sort of precedes them. It's like, oh, they wrote this paper, or they did, they built this product at Palantir, or, Brian Schimpf, who's the CEO of Anduril. I mean, he's sort of legendary as one of the best, best engineers, best coders that's ever come out of Palantir. And so it's like when you hear that about someone and it's like, okay, now they're going to come be CEO of Anduril, you don't worry that much about whether they're going to be able to build just an incredible product.
Gotcha. What are some of the companies that you're most excited about that you guys have invested in?
Yeah, so I'd say the thing that's happened that surprised me the most, it's like everyone kind of knows the Andurils, the Saronics, the companies that are selling directly to the DoD. But the thing that surprised me the most is how many companies want to build, the tier one supplier, like basically rebuild the defense industrial base and not sell directly to the Department of Defense, but sell to those Raytheons, the Lockheed Martins, and the Andurils, right? Like they'll work with anyone, but really build out the supply chain. And that's where I've been investing a lot. Like we have a great company called Apex Space that's building modular satellite buses. And the view in the space industry and space, space is going to be the next theater. It's going to be the next, space warfare is something we really have to think a lot about. But you can't be good at space warfare if you don't have enough stuff. Like if you don't have the actual platforms to send payloads up to space on.
The logistics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like we have, SpaceX can get things to space. But the biggest problem that the DoD has, and it's a problem that China's really focused on as well, is it can take 3 years to get a satellite bus, which is just, it's not the payload, it's not the thing that you're sending to space. It's the thing that, has the energy, it has the comms equipment. And really every satellite can operate with the same bus. Like you don't need the way that, again, going back to how the primes do work is the government will say, well, we're sending up this payload and this is how we want it designed. And so they'll design a brand new bus every time they do new, non-recurring engineering for the product. And then they'll send the payload up. And it's like, it can take 3 years to get a satellite bus. So this company is building satellite buses in 30 days. Like, why should it take so long to build the same bus over and over again? And so it's called...
In 30 days? From 3 years to 30 days?
Yeah, they went from clean sheet design to their first mission in 13 months. Like first working mission with payloads in space and low Earth orbit. And it's like if a brand new company that at that time had only 30 employees and had raised, tens of millions of dollars, but isn't SpaceX, right? But if a brand new company can go from forming a company to putting something in space with important primes in 13 months, you should be able to do the Henry Ford manufacturing line of satellite buses and be able to build thousands and thousands of satellite buses a year for the DoD. And that's what China's doing. I mean, China is maniacally focused on space, and they are maniacally focused on how do we build as many buses as possible so that we can own the satellite infrastructure in low Earth orbit. And it's something that we're going to have to very much worry about because right now we're in the lead in space. I actually think that's the theater where we should feel the most confidence because Elon and SpaceX have done an incredible service for this country in terms of what they're doing with Starshield and Starlink. But like the other companies coming up, like they want to be able to build as quickly as possible and as fast as possible. And, the big fear that I have is that government's going to say, oh, well, we've written the requirements so that we need this thing on this bus. And it's like, no, like we just need the bus that can do 90% of the job. and just get it up as fast as possible and make them as fast as possible. We need to produce as quickly as we can.
So this company it's a bus.
Yeah.
Brings things to space.
Yeah. So they can take any payload to space. They have three, like in some ways it's like, it looks a lot more like consumer technology. It's like we have three models. We have one for LEO, we have one for GEO, we have one for, the different orbit that you're going to. But for 90% of payloads, that bus is going to be perfect. And because they're only designing something 3 times versus designing a brand new thing every time they need to send something up, you take out all the design work, you crunch all the R&D, and then you build a system that allows you, it's designed for manufacturing. You manufacture as quickly as possible. And that methodology of manufacturing, again, I think people underestimate the impact that Elon Musk has had on the country. He's had an incredible impact on a bunch of companies. But the thing that he taught people, again, is the best part is no part. It's you have to make the product as simple as possible so that you can manufacture it as quickly as possible. And if you make it simple and if you make it, modular, something that can just be churned out where it doesn't have to be, every single time something happens, you have to design something new and you have to change your manufacturing process. You'll have fewer problems with the quality control. You'll have fewer problems with is something going to blow up? Is something going to, malfunction? If you're only designing a system where you don't change it and where you keep it simple, it's going to be far more successful in space. It's going to be far more successful on the road. And like that process, he's now graduated 20s, thousands of people out of Tesla and SpaceX, like these engineers who understand how to design for manufacturing and how to engineer, and that engineering and manufacturing have to be linked. And for a very long time, that is not how people viewed how you build. I mean, actually, Vice President J.D. Vance actually talked about this. He came and spoke at our summit, and he said the biggest lie that America was ever told about manufacturing was that you could divorce the design from the manufacturing. And of course, we did that. Apple's the best example of this, where if you open up an iPhone, it says designed in California. And there's this belief that you can all of the premium jobs are the design jobs and the manufacturing jobs are the cheap jobs, and you can outsource that anywhere. But it's like actually linking them is the most important, that is the most important thing. The design for manufacturing, where you link those roles in a company, is how you manufacture things that are simple, good, and you can do it as quickly as possible. And so that's the philosophy of Elon Musk. That's why everything he has done has been successful, and a lot of other people who do manufacturing are not. But now there's thousands of founders who've come out of his ethos and his, kind of the gospel of Elon, right? And they know how to build like that. And so they get on the factory floor and that's what they do. And the DoD can just, they can just pick winners. They can say, this is what we need. This one works the best. You have 100 of them, we'll take them. And there's something about that didn't exist even 5 years ago, and it's only going to grow.
I mean, now Apple's a wildly successful company as well. And so it did work for them. Or is it not working for them?
Well, I mean, it worked for them in that it saved them a lot of money. But this is what's interesting. We were talking earlier about this Apple in China book that came out, where I think it's rewriting the narrative of what Apple did. So it wasn't like Apple went to China, and I'm blanking on the writer's name, but he was the Financial Times reporter that covered Apple for like 20 years. And it's like it wasn't like they went to China and they said, oh, these guys know how to manufacture. We're going to give them, they're going to help us manufacture and achieve our goals. Apple trained all of the people in China to do manufacturing. It was something like 28 million over the course of the last 10 years that they've been there, that they've trained, which is the workforce of California. The interesting stat that this writer notes is that Apple invested, I think, something like 58 billion per year into China so that they could invest in these manufacturing hubs and invest in these factories. And when you compare it to the Marshall Plan, it's something like 2x the entire Marshall Plan that Apple has invested in China over the last 10 years. And the thing that is shocking about sort of this, like, divorcing the manufacturing and moving manufacturing out of America into a country is like, it wasn't like they had the people and the systems and the know-how where they were helping us. It was like we made an active choice, or I should say Apple made an active choice to train those people and to give them the knowledge, to give them the know-how of this is how you are going to build. And, until this book came out, I don't think people really recognized just how much capital that American companies were putting into China to train them on things we know how to do. And so, I think the kind of point of the vice president's speech was more about, like, we have to bring this design for manufacturing view back. where it's like you design where you manufacture, like, and that is Elon's view, but it's really the view of, I think, a lot in defense tech today.
I mean, how quickly is that shifted back to the U.S.?
On the manufacturing side, I mean, when we talk about like what keeps me up at night, like it is really, really hard to build factories that compete with the manufacturing and production capabilities of China. And it, again, this started 10, 15 years ago with Apple, but there's many good examples of, companies that were invested in by American venture capital firms in China, that, are way ahead in terms of production. I always say, like, the biggest scandal, Apple is a good example of us taking our knowledge and our know-how into China and teaching them something that was an American secret in many cases. But the biggest scandal of Silicon Valley is that Silicon Valley did that too. In 2008, 2009, venture capital firms that, are very large and very successful went into China and they taught them how to do early stage investing. Like the simple overview I gave of how venture capital works, they went in there and they trained people and they trained them as though they were, training their own associates in Silicon Valley. And they told them how you build these companies. And so, I always say that, the sort of venture capital ecosystem, it is American dynamism. It is the thing that allows America to be dominant in the global economy. It's how we build tech companies. And we just went over there as venture capitalists. And I shouldn't say we, because it wasn't my firm, it wasn't me, but VCs went over there and shared information, shared limited partners, shared all of the aspects and the functions of how you build an incredible, legacy-defining venture firm. And over 20 years, Silicon Valley or China has a true ecosystem of tech companies now, and they all work with the CCP, right? Like they figured out, how to build in the kind of confines of how China expects them to build. But this is scandalous. Like I think it's, it's Apple in China is scandalous that we invested that much money into another country's manufacturing regime and not into our own. Like, why didn't we do that for the state of Ohio? Why didn't we do that in the state of Florida? Like, what was it about America that Apple didn't want to invest in our own manufacturing capabilities 15 years ago so that they could make 500,000 iPhones in a day? And so that I think is the thing that's going to be hard to overcome. Now, it's happening on the defense side because you have to manufacture in the U.S. and there is this, manufacture where you are. But I think it's the thing that keeps me up at night is the production gap.
Man, we talked a little bit about Chinese espionage in Silicon Valley at breakfast this morning. And how prevalent is that over there?
It's pretty prevalent. From what I've heard from people I know, inside the DoD and various agencies, there are more spies in Washington, D.C. than any other city in America, and number 2 is Silicon Valley.
Man.
And of course, it's mostly Chinese spies. But there's been a lot of stories recently. There's things that happen where it's clear, it's clear espionage, right? It's clearly there's spies that are in big companies stealing. I mean, the last 30 years of Silicon Valley, how has China caught up so quickly? It's, of course, a lot of these people are stealing the secrets out of the companies and stealing the intellectual property and taking it back. So that's a known story. I think the areas that are even, more shocking are how the universities play into this, how, there was a story actually in the Stanford Review, which is a student paper at Stanford, that was saying there are known agents on, basically spies in Stanford campus that are either professors or working with professors where they are, stealing AI secrets from Stanford. And that's happening across, I think all of our great, university systems. Like anyone that has serious knowledge, the Chinese have been very good at infiltrating those systems. I also think the thing that's sort of misunderstood about Silicon Valley is because it's such an open culture, anyone can come and anyone can sort of, have a coffee and learn about things and kind of infiltrate the culture. And so there is also this cultural aspect in Silicon Valley where I was sharing, in 2015, 2016, when I was, more open about that I was, investing in deep tech and different things, I would always get these emails from random, Chinese venture capitalists. It happens less now, but Chinese venture capitalists who had a small venture capital firm and, they were from China and you didn't know where the money was from, but they were really interested in your companies and they wanted to learn more. And the DoD was very worried about that because they were worried about, CFIUS concerns, Chinese capital getting on the cap tables of these important companies. But it was more like the bigger danger was it was more of just like completely infiltrating the culture, which is what's happened in Silicon Valley, where you can't really divorce, a lot of tech culture from, that sort of that. They understand tech culture. They're there. They're completely part of it. And so, it's something where I think we need much, much better security around a lot of these AI projects in particular, a lot of these AI companies. It's clear that they're being targeted for espionage purposes. It's clear that, like, how did the Chinese catch up so quickly? It's like this is, a whole of society sort of project for them. And Silicon Valley, like this, I'd say it's sort of a Pollyanna view, sort of this, well, we're sort of this open, we're this open ecosystem and, anyone can come here and build. And again, it's part of the reason why it works is like you have an open society where anyone takes a phone call and you get people like me who know nothing about it and they can infiltrate it. But if you're working on behalf of a foreign government, it's not easy for nobody to infiltrate it with no resources, right? How easy is it for someone who's been trained to infiltrate a society, to infiltrate a company or infiltrate an ecosystem to be able to capture the intelligence they need? Like it is a very easy target.
Man, I told you this at breakfast, but I mean, we were having a conversation at lunch with one of the guys that I had on the show, a tech guy, and we were talking about finding a wife or something like that, and somehow this spun up. I'd brought up that China was setting up all these brothels all over the Middle East when I was there, and they would lure people in from state and all these other government agencies that fall in love with this, prostitute that's a spy, and the next thing you know, they're telling them secrets and they're on camera and all these other things. And he had said, this sounds just like Silicon Valley. He's like, you'll get like these beautiful Russian women or Chinese women that come in and they'll find the startup guys or whoever is making it big. And you got a tech guy that's normally in his basement that's probably never been with a woman before. And now he's with a 10 and get married, become whatever. And there goes all the secrets, and he said that was so prevalent. It's almost like a running joke.
Yeah. Well, I think
inside Silicon Valley, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, she's Russian, like, you know what that is. Yeah. But he just made it sound like it was very common for that kind of stuff to happen.
Yeah. I think, there's the famous sort of economic security is national security. You hear that all the time in Washington. And it really is like, technological supremacy is national security. And so if you really believe that, and Xi Jinping has said this, Vladimir Putin said this, like, he who owns AI will own the world, right? If you really believe that, like, why wouldn't you be infiltrating every single one of our major research labs? Like, why wouldn't you, be just maniacally focused on getting this information out of people? And if you've already set up a 30-year ecosystem where, it's sort of a, it's been very easy for Chinese researchers to come to Stanford or Berkeley or places like that. And it's been, very, very easy for the universities have taken funding. I mean, they have, I can't remember the name, but like Stanford got in a lot of trouble for having this sort of center devoted to Chinese cultural understanding and different things. And it was clearly funded by the CCP. And the universities say, oh, well, that's just, it's fine. We're taking capital for Chinese cultural understanding. It's like, what do you think that's actually being used for? These are sort of the soft power games and the espionage games that can, over a 30-year period have a striking impact on a culture.
I mean, how widely known is that? I mean, I got to be honest. That was one of the things that I was really disappointed in with Trump recently is the negotiation over the tariffs with China. I mean, we came to a settlement. I've heard about Chinese being embedded in our educational institutions for a long time, and part of the deal was, we're still going to take Chinese, and put them in our Ivy League schools.
Well, I think there's arguments. The Silicon Valley argument for it is it's like the golden visa, right? Like it's sort of like what happened after, the fall of Nazi Germany, and we took the entire sort of, physicist class and like all of the great engineers, and they made up our space program. Like that's sort of the argument is, if you can get all of these exceptional engineers working in American companies, if you can get them at American universities, a lot of them stay and they're brilliant, then they're working on American interests. And that's the argument that a lot of people make when they say, we can't cut off immigration from other countries because you want to take, Palmer says this too. It's like you want to just gut other countries. And you want to take their talent so that they can't operate. I think the problem is that it's so widespread and there's no way to defend against it, that these large companies, particularly the Apples of the world, Google, it's like, there are just repeat cases consistently of people stealing intellectual property, and just the security around these important things just not being, no one's paying attention to it. And I think that the bigger problem is, whenever I go to DC, there was a really good quote that DC people would say, which is like, when we look at China and Washington, we think China is our adversary. When Silicon Valley looks at China, they think China is my customer. And until very recently, that was true, right? Like it was very true that, every company wanted to go into China. They wanted to, they wanted to sell around the world, right? Like it was sort of this global phenomena. China can help me. I can learn a lot from China. I can manufacture in China. I can potentially sell to China, even though China doesn't like American companies, right? Like I think in some ways that was sort of, again, a Pollyanna-ish view. It was sort of a stupid view because, China was protecting its own. But it is only recently that Silicon Valley at all looks at China as a potential threat or adversary. Again, 2 years ago, American venture capital firms were investing in China, and they were investing in AI companies in China. There are still American venture capital firms that are investing in Chinese AI companies. Jeez. And that's legal. Like that's legal. That's not breaking any American laws. And to me, it's like that's can be a weapon of war. How are American investors allowed to invest in these companies?
That's crazy. That's crazy. Let's talk about the hypersonic company.
Yeah.
What is the name of that?
So Castelion. So it's another great story, a company I met very early in its trajectory. But it kind of, again, explains like why it's so important to meet people that you, or to invest in people that have seen it before. So the team was working at SpaceX. So a lot of the team was on, the government sales. They were part of Starshield, which was, selling to the government, working with government on, some classified projects and different things. And this team, the founder will tell the story that like every time he would talk to people inside the DoD, they would say like the biggest issue for America is we have no hypersonic weapons. Our missiles will be depleted. I think Palmer talked about this. If we were in a potential hot war with China, like our missiles would be depleted within 8 days or so, some crazy scenario in terms of the scenario running. And so this has been top of mind for DoD for a very long time. And the founder said, he consistently talked about this inside of SpaceX, but SpaceX is, maniacally focused on going to Mars. So, the sorts of projects that get done at SpaceX, they have many projects and many types of things that they're building, but hypersonics was not on the menu. And so he and a number of his colleagues, they left in 2023 to start this company, really focused, and just from day one, focused on hypersonic missiles. Long-range hypersonic strike missiles. And the thing that I found so interesting about this is, again, like going back to 2019, where Palmer said the M word. He said missiles in a pitch to a bunch of investors, and they freaked out, right? Like missiles? You're going to invest in missiles and hypersonic weapons and things that are kinetic? Like no, right? Like that was crossing the line. And so this was 2023. And I brought them in to the entire firm, and Andreessen Horowitz sat down for this pitch. And I just remember saying to my partner, David, I was like, I didn't ask, but like, you think anyone's going to care that we're investing in missiles? Like really the first slide is deterrence matters. This is such a serious team. This is a team that knows what they're doing. Like they built things before, they've studied under Elon. But I'm like, do you think anyone's going to worry about the M word? And he's like, I don't know, we'll see. And the pitch, the beautiful pitch, it ends or whatever. And, there's people on the consumer team, the games team, all the teams, like not everyone is American Dynamism. And, afterwards it was sort of like silence. And, I was like, does anyone want to say, everyone think this is cool? And literally everyone was like, yeah, this is great. And it was like, it shocked me because I'm like, I've been so used to like, okay, there's always one person who's like, oof, I'm like kind of uncomfortable, you know, or like, ooh, like I don't know how am I going to tell my friends, you know, at a cocktail party that we're investing in missiles? But there was something about like this team, like one, they're pros, you know, they clearly care about the mission. They talked about it from a deterrence perspective, right? Like this is the only way we're going to deter wars. You have to build up your defense industrial base. You have to build up your missile capabilities to stop wars, not start them. And I think it was such a compelling pitch and just an honest pitch about like, this is the state of play. Like we are not prepared. And if we don't do it, no one's going to do it. That, I mean, the thing that was amazing for me was like, gosh, like how far we've come. Like in just 5 years to go from, you know, headline risk, like we can't touch that to, okay, we're all in on this.
Wow.
And they've been moving very fast.
Wow. And you're a big part of that. I mean, what is that? How do you feel about that? Just being such a big part of that shift.
You know, like, I know you've talked about like signs and callings, and I think you believe deeply in that. I do too, where I'm like, I look at my uncle who, you know, everyone made fun of and kicked out of the Jesuits. And it's like, if not me, then who? And I do think that like there's something about God gives you your calling and your mission. And it doesn't make sense, right? Like you say, like it makes absolutely no sense that like someone who is just good with words, right? Like I'm a good writer. I know what I'm good at, but I'm not a technologist. I'm not going to explain to you how Castelion's missiles work. Like I'm not going to sit here and like be able to answer any of those questions. But I do think that I've been given a mission, and why me? I don't know, but I'm not going to question it. And that is it's someone else's will and not mine. So it makes me, you know, when Thibaut was on, like I think Thibaut had the greatest. Your interview with him was incredible, but where he had the 316 moment, where he was just so happy for like I can't believe I've been able to do what I've done, and then he just remembers, oh yeah, it's like not about me. Yeah. Like what a beautiful reminder. Yeah, it's like it's really not about any of us. You know?
Yeah. With the VC firm, I mean, will you guys invest in competitors? Would you invest in Anduril and Anduril's competitor, or do you put your bet all in one?
So yeah, it's a good question, because one thing is, you know, sometimes you invest in a company and you know they have no plans to build something, and then they end up competing with various companies or whatever. We kind of have a strong rule about it. It actually comes from my partner, Chris Dixon, who leads our crypto practice, where he basically says, like, you know, every company gets to tell you who their one competitor is. But like at a certain point, like there are some companies that get so large where they're going to do everything, or they think they're going to do everything. And so you can't say, oh, you know, a company, you know, like you can't honestly make the argument that, say, SpaceX is somehow competitive with a small company that's building satellite buses, or a company that's building ground stations, right? Because they have a ground station product that works with Starlink. So we try to make it like, you know, it's like we would never invest in companies that are competing directly head on, you know, that are doing the same product. Like we don't do that. But it's more like sometimes you invest in a company that starts out as one thing, and again, it pivots into something else, and then they're competing against each other. And whenever that happens, we always try to make sure that we sort of, you know, silo the information, that different partners are working on different things. You know, and it does happen. Like there's definitely, you know, examples of two companies just getting so big and so great. And it's always good when you see two companies winning, but it's like then they realize, oh, like we can each acquire the same company and do something new. And so they compete on acquisitions. It's like, it's normal in business that companies will compete. But if we knowingly knew that companies were competing against each other, like we would pick the winner. Like we put our eggs in one basket.
What gaps in the defense tech sector do you see that you think innovators should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'm spending a lot of time on future of space and space warfare. Like, I think there needs to be a lot more built for the next war being in space. So that means like building things on the software side for tracking. Like there needs to be, you know, a lot more on the production side, on the propulsion side, to make sure that things can be kinetic in space. So there's a lot, I think, happening in sort of what does the future of space warfare look like. But everything for me comes back to this production issue. Like I recently was with some operators on the ground on the border of Ukraine. And the sort of, I went with a group to kind of learn about how and where investors should be investing, where are sort of the major gaps in that war. And the kind of takeaway that I took from it that I don't think I really fully kind of understood until I was there was Russia has built up their defense industrial base over 3 years in an extraordinary way, right? Like they were kind of weak when they first started. Now they've built up their production capacity to really greatly be able to have this war against the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, to their credit, have built just-in-time manufacturing facilities where they can build drones very, very quickly. They get the information off the battlefield that allows them to innovate on how the drones work. They're doing that on the ground. They have distributed manufacturing capabilities that are tailor-made for this war. So in some ways, they've built up a defense industrial base as well. So it's Ukraine and Russia have done a great job of building that capacity up and that production capacity. The other player in this is China, who is supplying both sides of the war. So they're greatly supplying the Russians with the dumb parts and the things that they need to build the drones, or with drones themselves. And they're also supplying the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians are in a desperate situation. They're building things in the trenches. They'll take whatever they can get, and they'll take Chinese infrastructure as well. So the only group of people and the only country that really hasn't benefited from the war, and I say benefit loosely, but really hasn't been able to build up the industrial capacity in the same way that those three countries have, is America. And so the thing that keeps me up at night, the place where we invest, is how do we increase the speed of production? And it can be on satellite buses, ground stations, modular things, modular forms of energy, SMRs, small modular reactors for nuclear. How do we build those as quickly as possible? But it's just the modularization and the production thing that I'm less interested in software or design. I'm much more interested in how do we just rebuild the manufacturing powerhouse that America once was. And I think we can do it. But there's a lot of gaps in there.
Where would that fit in? Would that be a manufacturing company that attaches itself to an Anduril or a Saronic?
Yeah.
Because when I talked to Dino, it sounds like all of Saronic it sounds like they're from conception of the idea to the end product.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean they vertically integrate to where they're building everything. Like they have an in-house machine shop. We have another company that I work very closely with called Hadrian that's building these automated machine shops where they build parts for every company you've ever heard of in defense and aerospace, critical parts that have to be built in the U.S. And it used to be that if you needed a critical part, you'd go to one of these massive machine shops. The machine shops are run by someone who's older, usually in their 60s, 50s, 60s. They have apprentices who study them. It can take 2 to 3 years to learn how to manufacture these critical parts. If you bring software into the factory, as Hadrian has done, they can teach a former bus driver, a high school dropout, someone. Their goal is they want to take baristas and train them to make these critical parts in 30 days, and it's because you automate 80-90% of the process, the quality control, the design aspects. You automate it with software, and then the last 10% you can teach a human to do. But that leads to just extraordinary output. So the more factories we can have that are software-defined factories, where the software is actually making it easier for humans to produce more in the factory, whether it's critical machined parts, whether it's casting, whether it's sort of the tier kind of 2 to 3 suppliers where it's the kind of the joysticks or the things that are inside. It's like there's so many critical parts that are actually inside of planes, of anything defense related, where you just need to be able to produce 10x more of all of those things. Munitions. I mean, there's a lot of talk now about how do we just turbocharge how quickly we can build munitions, because we don't have enough. But it really is I think all of the fears that I have about defense come down to production. It's all how quickly can you build. And yes, Saronic is vertically integrated, but there's a lot of companies that would attach one of those software-defined factories to them and say, hey, just build us as many as you can of this one part.
What are you excited about in space?
So, I mean, in space, it really is anything to do with offensive space. I think SpaceX is the most incredible company in the world. Mm-hmm. They've done extraordinary work. They do extraordinary work with government. They now have a direct-to-cell, platform. They have Starlink, which I think is completely revolutionizing, it's revolutionizing internet. But there's still more things that need to be done. I'm invested in a company that's focused on ground stations, Northwood Space. They're building modular ground stations for every other company that needs to get data back to the ground. Our ground station infrastructure, extremely old. It takes forever to send. The comms take forever. And so if you can just have more modular ground stations across the world to get that data back from low Earth orbit, That's game changing. So they're doing, they're working with USG. But I think there's, again, it all comes back to just more. It's like these things are in some ways like, I don't want to say simple, but a lot of the things that I'm investing in are not science fair experiments. They're not things that are kind of going to get you riled up about, wow, like that sounds like the future. But it's just, okay, we're just going to produce more of the things that we need because the infrastructure is just so lagging or so old.
I'm just curious, have you looked at Steve Quast's company, Space Built?
No.
He's they're basically doing logistics to where you build these things in space. That way it's not such a heavy payload. The satellite parts don't need to be protected with Kevlar and, bulletproof vest or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
He's talking about bringing things up in sections and actually assembling in space so that the payload's a lot less leaving Earth. But
yeah. I'd love to chat with them.
I'll connect you.
Thanks.
But yeah, fascinating guy. Yeah. But let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll wrap it up. Wearing clothes that actually fit, it changes everything. That's what I've found with True Classic. Their gear is built to make guys feel good in their own skin. Because when you feel good, you show up with purpose. More confident, more present. Whether you're heading into a meeting, grabbing dinner, or chasing your kids around the yard, what you're wearing matters more than you think. True Classic nails the balance. Soft, comfortable fabric that moves with you, tailored where it counts, and relaxed where it should be. No awkward bunching, no stiff collars, no weird fits. Just simple, flattering clothes that help you live well and feel like yourself. Take the guesswork out of your style because starting your day feeling like you've already got a win under your belt makes a big difference. Forget overpriced designer brands. Ditch the disposable fast fashion. True Classic is built for comfort, built to last, and built to give back. You can grab them at Target, Costco, or head to trueclassic.com/SRS and get hooked up today. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Work can be a stressful place. All those emails piling up, back-to-back meetings, and that constant pressure to keep up. Summer might be the perfect time to pause and take small steps toward improving your own wellness. With over 30,000 therapists and more than 5 million people served globally, it's incredibly easy to fit into your schedule. You can meet with a licensed therapist right from your phone and even switch therapists at any time. With an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 from over 1.7 million reviews, it's clear it's helping a lot of people. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/SRS. That's BetterHelp.com/SRS. All right, Katherine, back from the break. We're going to do a shift here and talk about the attack on the American family. Mm-hmm. So your mother had 2 sons.
Yeah. Third on the way.
Third on the way. I didn't know if I was supposed to say that or not.
I think it's obvious at this point. I'd rather people know.
But yeah, what do you mean by that? The attack on the American family? Yeah,
no, it's I wrote a speech that I gave a couple months ago where I really started talking about how I see kind of all of history as a war between the family and the state. These 2 big institutions. One is, and it goes back to Plato. It goes back to like the Republic, the Greeks, right, where the entire philosophy of the Republic is that perhaps the state can take better care of a society than these institutional families. And so when you look at you go back through history and you see that especially authoritarian regimes, the first thing that an authoritarian regime does when it wants to take over a society is it ruthlessly destroys the family. So you mentioned the one-child policy in China. That was an attack, a deliberate attack on the family from an authoritarian regime. And the purpose of it was, it was for national interest. They talk about, we couldn't, we wouldn't be able to supply enough people with food. But what it really was to weaken the only institution that can ever combat the state, which is the family. And so I'm a pretty conspiratorial person. I think there's been a concerted attack on the family to strengthen the state, particularly for the last 50 years. But it's been done in very specific ways, in legal ways, through the education system, through the medical system, and it is deliberately destroyed. And you see it through the birth rate, like we talked about in the beginning. Fewer and fewer people want to have families, and it's because of this deliberate attack on the family. And I wrote this piece called "The War on Suffering," where I've been very vocal about the fact that I think everything in America changed in 1973. Everyone always there's this website called WTF happened in 1971. And it points to that's when we came off the gold standard. That's when regulation started exploding in America. What happened in this year where everything bad in America started like from this moment where you just see just complete change in a lot of things around America. And I've always said that might have been the economic change that happened in America, where financialization started and where housing became so expensive, where it became ridiculously expensive to afford healthcare or education. But in 1973. There were two things that radically changed how Americans view themselves, how men and women view themselves, and ultimately what I think is sort of the impetus and start of this sort of unraveling of the family. And I've said this a lot publicly on what I think changed for men, which was 1973 in January. Nixon did the most profound and most popular thing that he ever did during his presidency, which was that he ended the draft. It was unanimous. It was, coming off of Vietnam. It was like a unanimous thing that everyone loved. Everyone knew what needed to happen, where he said, we're going to be an all volunteer force and we're going to allow people to choose to serve their country. And of course, this is something that even today, people, our military celebrates the fact that we don't have a draft, that, this is part of American culture. But I think what it fundamentally said to young people is that it is a choice to serve. It is a choice. Not everyone does it. Only the people who want to. They might want to do it for economic reasons. They might want to do it for love of country. But it is not something that everyone has to do to serve and defend their country. And if you think about it, throughout human history, that is the first time that a country has said to young men, your purpose on this earth is not to defend where you live. And it was codified. It was like, that is not the purpose of manhood. And then 10 days later, and it was only in 2023 when I was writing this piece that I actually even realized this, 10 days later, the female equivalent happened, where Roe v. Wade passed from the Supreme Court. And that had a similar impact on women, where it used to be, for all of human history, your purpose on this earth is to have children, is to have a family. And this was the first time, and in Western society too, a lot of nations copied us after it, but this was the moment that really changed, where 10 days after men were told your purpose is not to serve, women were told your purpose is not to have a family, it's your choice.
Wow.
And so it completely changes the view of how men view themselves and how women view themselves, all in 1973, January, 10 days. And it's like, I would say there's a lot of people who would say, well, these are all good things. It's really good that there's choice in America. Not everyone should have to serve their country. Like not everyone, men and women shouldn't have to go to war, or women shouldn't have to become mothers. But what we didn't do in that moment is we didn't provide anyone an alternative purpose. We didn't provide men and women anything that says, actually, the purpose of manhood is this, or actually the purpose of womanhood is this. We just said, go figure it out yourself. Actually, maybe there is no purpose. In the 70s, like there was this very clear, kind of, I would say almost like nihilistic culture of, well, nothing really matters anymore. Like you can do whatever you want. And like that I think has permeated, so much of society where we don't even believe suffering should exist anymore. It's, it's like the suffering for your country is why would anyone do that? Suffering for your family, why would you do that? But I think the minute that we destroyed, the unique purpose of woman, which for, you can't debate that for millennial, that was the purpose of women, was to bear children and to have family. And then the unique purpose of man, which is to fight. The minute that we destroyed those purposes, men and women stopped relating to each other. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what their purpose was. They didn't know how they could relate. And when you look at it from that framework, the family was destined to fail from that moment.
Damn. You think every man should have to serve the country?
No. That I think is I don't know that every man needs to go to war, right? But I think there is something that happens when you say, we once were a country where everyone was treated this way. Everyone knew their purpose. Everyone woke up in the morning and knew, at 18, there is a chance I will have to serve my country. And that, just understanding that is your purpose, changes the way you walk. It changes the way that you think about your life. And And the same thing for, I don't think every woman should have to be a mother. If I talk to, 9 people or 10 people, 9 out of 10 people would say, of course, like these are good things, right? These are popular things. But at the same time, when we didn't replace that purpose with something else, and we didn't have a way of saying, this is how society should be organized.
You're saying that it changed the consciousness of the country.
Yes. And the thing that we did instead was, instead of, serving your country is an outward focused thing. It's focused on other people. It's focused on someone other than you. The same thing with being a mother. The minute you become a mother, you stop worrying about yourself, right? Like you don't have time to make yourself the most important thing. Like you have to worry about your children. So in both of those cases, those purposes, they were outwardly focused. They were things where this is how we organize society, and you care about the institution of family, and the men care about the institution of their country. And then, but what we did instead was we turned inward. We started focusing on our own mind. And this is like the moment that we really start thinking about, psychology, like who am I? What is my purpose on this earth? There's a great book by Philip Reith that was written in the 60s, actually, called The Triumph of the Therapeutic, which is that, man really started turning inward in the 60s and early 70s and really thinking about, like, do I have purpose on this earth, and what is this? And the minute that you stop focusing outward and you become very contemplative, which is really what American culture has become, you become very individualistic, become very obsessed with yourself. Our generation is, the trophy generation, the me generation of like everything, everything about me is interesting, and I'm an individual and I can achieve anything I want. There's no barriers, there's no limitations. But it completely rips out all of the sort of underpinnings of what makes a society function. And I think in some ways that those were sort of the moments where it's like, then you saw the unraveling of, well, there shouldn't be any kind of suffering. Like, it's around the same time that no fault divorce happened, around the same time that, you shouldn't be told who you are, you shouldn't be judged. Similarly in the medical arena, this is around the time where ADHD sort of, the late 80s, SSRIs started really coming about, where it's like we have to start medicating us because we're thinking too much about ourselves and we have too much depression. And of course, depression, the SSRIs, I think, we're seen as kind of a niche thing. And now they're, what is the number of Americans that are on them? The sort of focus on the move to focus on the self was a very deliberate action. And I think that the crisis of the family comes from the fact that if you're focused on yourself, you really can't be focused on a family. And you hear this all the time from young people. It's like, I haven't achieved what I wanted. I can barely take care of myself at mid-20s. I don't know who I am. How am I going to be able to take care of a kid? And we've forgotten that, like, previous generations, they didn't have that luxury. They didn't have the extended adolescence where they could, say, oh, well, I don't know myself. Like, how am I gonna go to war if I don't know myself? Like, the greatest generation wasn't able to say that. They just had to do it. And in some ways, it's like, we can definitely make the argument that things are better now. And in many ways, like, people, are living longer. Like, they're, you can definitely make the argument that these things were not necessarily good for society, but at least there was a societal purpose and organization. And I think the thing that has really been corrupted over the last 50 years is that we do not know what our American purpose is. We just, and particularly as it comes to the family, family has become an option. It's no longer the default institution that you build your life in.
Yeah.
And without that default institution you build your life in, people they flail. You have the loneliness epidemic. You have young women and men who...
Depression,
exactly.
For any men out there that are wondering what your purpose is, it's to provide for your fucking family and protect them. That's it. No. But I didn't realize there was that much confusion out there about it. But then, you look around and where are all the men?
Yeah.
Where did they go?
Yeah. To quote the New York Times.
Yeah. Right. So, I wish I would have known you were a conspiratorial person, because otherwise we'd be talking about aliens and the pyramids and Machu Picchu and all kinds of other shit. But so the question is, you had mentioned, those were draft-ended pro-choice or Roe v. Wade, 10 days apart. So is this just the result of shitty decision-making? The list goes... I'm not weighing in on those subjects, but what I'm saying is, it sounds like you think that's where it started. Then we see, all the stuff with the gender stuff nowadays, and Washington State, the state will come and take your kid if you don't do the gender affirming care, and there's just a whole number of things. And so, is it stemming from somewhere, or is this just a result of decisions?
I think it's a result of both legal and medical decisions, because I think the medical community has a huge part of this as well. But I think it comes down to the war on suffering has been won. We've defeated suffering, and life is not about suffering. That is what I think our legal system thinks. That's what our medical system thinks. I mean, when you think of the opioid epidemic, what started the opioid epidemic in the 90s? It was the belief in the medical community that suffering from back pain is one of the worst things that can happen, and that there's a magical pill that you can take that's going to get you off of back pain. And then there were pill mills across America handing out opioids because people couldn't deal with suffering. And that was seen as a good thing. Like, don't you want to eradicate suffering? Same thing with ADHD. Young boys, it's like they can't focus in school. Here's a magical pill, and you're not going to suffer anymore. Your family's not going to suffer. Your teacher's not going to suffer. You're going to feel great. And now 23% of boys at 17 years old are on ADHD medication in America. And it's because we just do not believe that anyone should have to suffer. We don't believe in resilience. We don't believe that anyone should have to make a choice that has something to do with society or something that is duty versus what they want to do. It's all individualistic. And I think, the best example of the war on suffering is what hasn't happened fully in the US, but it's happening in the UK. It already happened in Canada, which is if you now suffer from mental illness, you have the right to die. If you're over 18, you are welcome to go to a doctor who will sign off of it, and you can end your life. And like
suicide machines.
And that was not the America we lived in before.
Yeah.
So the question is, why are we so opposed to suffering? And I get a lot of pushback from people on this. Well, why are you pro suffering? And I'm a practicing Catholic. The entire story of Catholicism is about Jesus suffering for something noble, for something good for us, right? But it is a story of suffering. And the movement to try to pull the story of suffering out of human life, that's removing human nature. That's removing the entire Christian story out of how we live, and saying you are not expected to suffer. What happens then? You have an entire generation of young people who are no longer resilient. So I think one of the biggest lies is
I think it takes drive away too.
Oh, 100%.
Takes personal drive away.
Yeah.
Which creates less innovators.
Totally. Which is why I do think, like, a lot of these young people, the reason they go to Silicon Valley and they sleep on the factory floor and they work hard and they're building hard things is because they know that suffering is inherently, like, there is something good about suffering for a purpose greater than yourself. But I do think that people are confused about how to find that. Like, how do you find that outside of a society that tells you you don't need to get married, you don't need to have kids, you don't need to serve your country, you don't need to do something greater than yourself for your community, you don't need to be a pillar of the community anymore, you can move wherever you want, just total freedom. And I think without those guardrails or those guides or people who can help you navigate life, like, people just get lost.
Man, we covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah, we did.
We covered a lot of ground. I wish we had more time, but I know you got a
Likewise.
flight to catch.
Yeah.
But last question. 3 people you want to see on the show.
Oh my goodness. Well, I won't volunteer our mutual friend, but I'd like to see him on the show, as we talked about in the car. But Elon, I think I'd love to see you chat with Elon. I think he's, we didn't get a chance to talk about Doge, but I think he's learned a lot about government. And I haven't heard him do a long form interview of kind of what it's like to try to reform government. I think that'd be really an interesting story.
Do you think, sorry, I lied, not last question. Do you think Doge worked?
I do, but for different reasons than most people. I think it worked as a cultural, I think it changed the culture in Washington, but also across the country, where, Twitter was sort of the early experiment in Doging. And, he proved you can cut 75% of people. And then he went to government and he doged different departments. And there was a lot of, I think, backlash, but I think it made people realize we don't need as many people. We can work harder. We need to be more fiscally responsible. We need to be able to understand, like, where the money's going. I think a lot of people woke up and realized we're spending ridiculous amounts of money on things we don't need. And I do think that sort of cultural change is going to permeate all industries, all places. I mean, it's happening in the Army now. Like, the Army doged itself. with the Army Transformation Initiative. So General George and Secretary Driscoll came out and they said, like, we're not going to wait for DOGE to come to us. We want to cut our budget by 8%. We want to get all of these old products we don't need anymore, all these defense things that we don't need. They call it the Humvee. They say, why do we have Humvees in production that were built for, pre-Desert Storm that we haven't used in 20 years? Like, why do we need that? Like, there's another vehicle that we could actually use that's built for modern warfare. And so they've been very forthright about, like, we want to DOGE ourselves.
Wow.
So I think it's caused this sort of cultural change.
I mean, are you upset that it didn't stick? It's not going to stick, correct? My understanding is that this is for 1 year.
Yeah.
The House never got on with it, and
yeah. Well, I think
now it goes right back to the same old shit.
Yeah, I would have liked to see the DOGE cuts codified. It still could happen, right? Like, it could happen in a separate bill, but then there's still tremendous young people. We know a lot of them who are working in DOGE and doing important work and modernizing the systems. So I'm hopeful that at least that entity will stay. But I think as a cultural movement, I mean, it's certainly changed how companies think about how many people they need. I also think AI is going to change how many people think they need, right? Like, there's other factors that are going to impact that, but I think it will prove to have been successful.
I hope so, man. I don't know. I feel like our institutions are in shambles, and it's going to take this younger generation to really step it up.
Yeah.
And fix that. So, all right, one more
person. I'm trying to think which founder you should have on. You should definitely have on Elon.
The Hypersonics guys.
Yeah, I think, Brian Hargis at Castelion would be a good interview.
Maybe you can connect me.
I can definitely connect you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Katherine, what a awesome conversation. I'd love to chat with you again sometime if you'd come back. But
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
It's my pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.